Hey now. Hey now, hey now, hey now. We're live. Hey now. Let me get the everything situated here. I need to get the YouTube URL because of course it's different every time. And yeah, we're going to be reading The Return of the King today, which is exciting. Everything situated. Okay, there we go. All right, looks good, looks good. Just go ahead and get the word out that we're live here, and then we'll begin shortly. That up there. Hey, Deb, how's it going? Hey, Daryl. How is everything today? I'm just in the process of getting the word out that I'm live here. Okay, there we go. All right. So how's everybody feeling today? I'm hoping that you're all doing good out there. I had a heck of a week because I had a shoulder injury, but starting to feel better. So we're getting there. It just seems that it's just when one thing stops hurting, another thing must arise. And one shall rise. But we're ready to go. We're starting The Return of the King today. I have it right here. This is, from the new copy that I got kind of recently. I retired the old ones. Hey, WT, the best part of Thursday. Indeed. I was kind of like a little bit distraught in a way because I noticed that the constant handling of the Lord of the Rings books have really worn them down, and they so I was like, oh, these are like my childhood copies here. So I retired them and I ordered a new set on Amazon, and I went with these paperbacks, and the reason I went with these specifically is because they're nice, first off, and they had some lovely sets of the Lord of the Rings, but I wanted one that also had the Hobbit because that's how I had it, and I wanted all to match the way that it used to. So, so they're not from the 70s. As a matter of fact, these were probably printed very recently. Let's see what it says, actually. I'm sure it says it's here somewhere. Where would it say when it was printed? Hey, Wayne. The illustrated ones are very cool. A few of the books that I have are illustrated. My Silmarillion is illustrated. Beren and Luthien is illustrated. And Fall of Numenor is actually illuminated, which I think is even cooler. Yeah, it actually doesn't say when this was printed, or if it does, I don't know where to look to find that. Maybe at the very back. I'm sure it was like sometime in the past few years. Oh well. As a matter of fact, well, Deb, we just started. I've only been live for a few minutes. Since I know, Wayne, I know you're very fond of the humor here. Let me grab it here. I have Beren and Luthien here. If I could find the right image. Yep, here it is. Tevildo's House of Cats. Oh, you know what I have to do, though? I have to go into my what do you call it? The community page. And the reason that I wanted to do that was because Hail to Bildo and his House of Cats, exactly. There was somebody that asked me a question on the community page that isn't really suitable for me to do a segment on in a video, but would be suitable for me to read it out on a live. I just have to find it. Oh no, maybe it was Quora. I don't see it there. Hey there, Mel. How's it going? Mel, you're fairly new, aren't you? I think you just joined as a member not too long ago. I am trying to find it, and I don't know if it's in here. Maybe it was on Quora, actually. Yeah, let me look at Quora real quick. In that case, I really don't know what to tell them. Hey, Sarah. Let me go over to Quora and see. There was a question. I'll address it either way because it's something that I can do. Yesterday, yeah. Well, yesterday, because yesterday was Wednesday, and the way that I work with the videos is, you notice the videos come out on Wednesdays. I record them on Tuesday. And then, hey, Matt Damon, how's it going? I record the videos on Tuesday, and then I edit them on Wednesday, and I put it up. And it's usually like very late Wednesday night or very early Thursday morning if it's after midnight, where it'll go out to members. But when I'm doing the editing is when I go, all right, let's see who the member list is so that I could put it at the end card there, all the members. And I was like, oh, we had a few new people, and I saw your name on there, so it's sort of like really fresh in my brain there. Hey, Nico, how's it going? The migraine, I don't have a migraine right now, thankfully. I'm still recovering from like a bit of a shoulder injury, but thankfully I'm not suffering from a migraine right now. There is something I wanted to address because it was just a question that I don't know how to address other than just talking about it on a live stream, but... Oh, here it is. Oh, here's a familiar name. You guys might remember this name from a few of my videos. It was Local Psycho. Local Psycho requested me to answer this on Quora, and it's not really a Tolkien question, but what is a question you really want to answer but no one asked it yet? And that's interesting because usually if there's something that I really want to write about or talk about, I'll usually just sort of nudge one of my friends and say, hey, could you go on Quora and ask me this so I could write about it? But that hasn't happened in a bit, though. And I didn't realize, I was like, I'm sure there's something, but it's sort of like, I'll know it when I see it sort of situation. I didn't really know how to answer that. But then it came to me because I was writing the answer to a question about... why Gandalf in The Hobbit could understand what the wargs were saying in their own language. And I did a little bit of research about the warg language, and which is really supposed to be sort of a dog language, and the warg language is like a debased form of it. But yeah. Hey there, media. My favorite fan fiction creator, that would be Sid Kemp. That would be my good friend Sid Kemp. And I'm going to talk about him in a little bit too, actually. I have a bit of an announcement there too. And hey, Moogle. But anyway, I realized that when I was writing about animal languages in The Hobbit specifically, and just in general, there was a question that or a topic, I should say, that I always wanted to talk about. Nobody's ever going to ask me a question about it. Nobody knows about it, So it's in the new episode. It's in episode 149. Those of you that are channel members, you can see it there, where I got to talk about something. And I was like, hey, let me just, it's not really about a language spoken by animals, but it is about a language called Animalic, and I talk about it a little bit in depth in episode 149. And for those of you who don't know, when J.R.R. Tolkien was really young, when he was a child, he was about 10 years old, he had these two cousins named Mary and Marjorie, and they made up a language that they could speak among themselves and much to the consternation of all the adults who were creeped out by these two little girls just saying this stuff. And it was all English. What they did was they just swapped English words for names of animals. So, they'd be like, dog, dolphin, like something like that, and it wasn't a very good language, obviously, but it was something children came up with. And that was the first time little Johnny Tolkien, hey, Dylan, thought to himself, wait a minute, you could just make a language of your own. And then, and here we are in 2026 talking about him. But yeah, it's a little segment I put in there in episode 149 for those of you who haven't seen it. That is sort of the one thing that I wish people would ask me about, but I realized nobody was ever going to ask me about Animalic because Tolkien even barely talked about it, Barely ever talked about it. Now, I said I was going to talk about Sid. So I've been trying to get a hold of him, and I haven't been able to, which is okay because I understand he's going through a lot right now. So this past Saturday, me and Matt and Laurel, who I should text right now to let her know that I'm live, actually. Let me do that real quick, and then I'll talk about this. We had a really fun time this last Saturday. Where are you? Okay, because she doesn't like to miss these. Okay, there we go. So anyway, this past Saturday, me and Matt and Laurel did our table read of the wonderful play that I'm going to flash the script in front of you here. The wonderful play that Matt wrote, which is based on Beren and Luthien, one of Tolkien's oldest stories. And it's not really based off the entirety of Beren and Luthien, but really just sort of like the condensed form that's found in the Silmarillion, and a little bit of the Lay of Luthien in there as well, which is the poetic version. But anyway, we did the table read for the play, and it was really fun. But we realized that there is a challenge inherent in performing this for you. The first challenge was that Sid told us that he wasn't going to be able to do it. And I don't want to go into too much detail because he wouldn't want me to go into detail, but it's really just because of some health concerns he has, and because of all the treatment he's needing, and because of that he can't be in the play. He's still going to continue to be in the Council of Tolkien regular episodes, but just not the one in June where we will be performing the play. So, but we ran into a challenge when going through the table read, is that there is a lot of narration, and we don't have one person that is sort of a dedicated narrator. Everybody's playing multiple roles. Just to give you guys a little bit of a teaser here, I play Sauron, I play Finrod, and I play a few other characters, like I believe I'm Curufin, for example. But anyway, so we started out with Matt reading the narration and us giving him notes on like where to kind of cut it down a bit and everything so that it's not too much narrative voice. But then I said, this isn't really working. So what I suggested was we try Laurel doing the narration. And I felt that it worked, but Matt felt that there is the middle part of the play where it's a lot of just Luthien or Luthien and Melian speaking. So, and then if Laurel's doing the narration, she's kind of doing everything for a little while, and it's a lot to put on her. And so I had the idea that if Sid can't be there, that maybe he could be the narrator anyway, and he could pre-record his lines, and then I could play them back while we're performing. And everybody liked this idea, but I haven't been able to actually get in touch with Sid. So my backup plan is on, and they're in the chat right now. Wayne over on the Twitch side of things would help me out by doing the narration there, because he's a radio professional and has experience doing that sort of thing. Oh, thanks very much. Hi. So you're in Ireland. That's wonderful. Ireland. So, that would be Lyndon, right? You're from the Grey Havens there. How are you doing? No, yeah, it would all be pre-recorded. The reason I ask Wayne is just because I know his voice really well, and he's got the radio voice, and he's also looking for some stuff for his portfolio. But realistically, the best way to go about it, like, would be to have Sid do it so that he could be involved in some small way. But I need to hear back from him like pretty soon. Sid is going to be in the audience with you guys watching, probably also his wife, Chris. You guys know Chris because she pops up in the chat quite a bit, but there we have it. But anyway, guys, enough of all that. Let's go over here. We're going to read The Return of the King today, and this is our first reading of The Return of the King, which comprises of really 3 parts of The Lord of the Rings. Oh, wait, now I can't see the YouTube chat. Let me fix that. There it is. It comprises 3 parts. It's book 5 and book 6, and also the appendix, or the appendices, as I should say. There's everything. There's also an index. I don't think we need to read through the index, but there is appendix A through F. So there's all that, Well, to do the narrator bit, I don't think somebody needs to be an expert on the Lord of the Rings. Maybe just a little bit of coaching from me on pronunciations, but that wouldn't be something that we would work through. Let me make the YouTube chat bigger. I'm having a hard time with that. That's better. I answered a comment for you a few days ago on the pronunciation of Earendel. I remember that comment. I thought it was really good because you were asking it. Let me give you a little credit here. It's difficult to ask a question about pronunciation in text. And hey, Matt, you managed to get the message across about what you were saying about Earendel. Of course, Earendel, Elrond's father, that's the way you say it, Earendil. And the emphasis is on the, it's on the Ren. And a lot of people will like, why isn't it on Ea? Because of the 2 dots. And the reason is the 2 dots on the A are just telling you that the E and the A are their own syllables. If it was an accent, a little dash, that would be different. And actually, the word, it was originally spelled with an accent above the E, so it would have been Earendel. Actually, and it was EL at the end, so it would be Earendel, which actually is Middle English. And it means shining ray, the name of an angel in a very old poem that Tolkien was pretty familiar with. That he read it around 1914 or so, shortly before he would have entered the military service. But anyway, guys, here we have The Return of the King. So let's start here. So the narrative voice here, we talked about this a lot. There's 10 chapters in book 5. There's 9 chapters in book 6. And then there's, the A, B, C, D, E, F appendixes. But anyway, there's a synopsis here that I will read just to catch everybody up so that we can remember everything that happened. But I want to talk a little bit about who is the narrative voice, because it's not always incredibly clear which character is telling the story. Sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's not so clear. We're all supposed to sort of like go into this with the thought that this is a story that Frodo specifically is telling, but of course there are a lot of portions that Frodo is not actually there for. Now, I almost said The Return of the King. The Fellowship of the Ring, the first 2 books, absolutely, you could say that's like 100% Frodo, if not 100%, maybe like 99% Frodo. And obviously there's some portions during the Council of Elrond where there are other characters that are telling their experiences, but they're telling their experiences basically to Frodo. And but once everything breaks up and Frodo and Sam go in one direction and Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas go in another direction, it splits up, because we had chapters that were following Frodo and Sam, and we had chapters that were following Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas, and then we had chapters that were following Merry and Pippin. And now Merry and Pippin have been split up. So we're going to have chapters that follow Merry. We're going to have chapters that follow Pippin. We're going to have chapters that follow Frodo, Sam, Gollum. We're going to have chapters that follow Aragorn. Even like a few parts that are just sort of Gandalf, you know. But anyway, it's interesting, though, is that the Frodo Sam parts, about halfway through book 4, you'll notice that it becomes a lot less Frodo and a lot more Sam. And this is because we get these situations where Frodo is asleep and Sam is doing things, and we know everything that he's doing. You know, he's the one whose thoughts that we're privy to. He's the one that's sort of been telling the story for a little while, which is interesting. But like I said, now that Merry and Pippin have been split up, with Pippin, he is with Gandalf, he is headed to Minas Tirith, and Merry is staying with Theoden. And that's actually where we're going to start. We're going to start with Pippin heading towards Minas Tirith. Now, keep in mind that timeline-wise, the first few chapters here are going to be taking place simultaneously with things that happened at the end of the Two Towers, and also simultaneously with some things that we haven't read yet because they're in book 6. You know, well, really not so much book 6, really, because book 5 does sort of like swap between the two narratives. It's not like the Two Towers where one half is one perspective and the other half is the other perspective, because there's multiple perspectives now. Now let's start with this synopsis here that will catch everybody up. Oh, that's chapter 1. Where's my synopsis? Here it is. This is the third part of The Lord of the Rings. The first part, The Fellowship of the Ring, told how Gandalf the Grey discovered that the ring possessed by Frodo and the Hobbit was in fact the One Ring, ruler of all the rings of power. It recounted the flight of Frodo and his companions from the quiet shire of their home, pursued by the terror of the Black Riders of Mordor, until at last, with the aid of Aragorn the Ranger of Eriador, they came through desperate perils to the house of Elrond in Rivendell. There was held the great council of Elrond, at which point it was decided to attempt the destruction of the ring, and Frodo was appointed the ring-bearer. The companions of the ring were then chosen, who were to aid him in his quest, to come, if he could, to the Mountain of Fire in Mordor, the land of the enemy himself, where alone the ring could be unmade. In this fellowship were Aragorn and Boromir, the son of the Lord of Gondor, representing men; Legolas, son of the Elven King of Mirkwood, for the elves; Gimli, son of Gloin, of the Lonely Mountain, for the dwarves; Frodo with his servant Samwise and his two young kinsmen Meriadoc and Peregrine, for the hobbits; and Gandalf the Grey. The companions journeyed in secret far from Rivendell in the north, until, baffled in their attempt to cross the high pass of Carathras in winter, they were led by Gandalf through the hidden gate and entered the vast mines of Moria, seeking a way beneath the mountains. There Gandalf, in battle with the dreadful spirit of the underworld, fell into a dark abyss. But Aragorn, now revealed as the hidden heir of the ancient kings of the West. And by the way, when they say West in that instance, they're talking about Numenor, not the Undying Lands, led the company on from the east gate of Moria, through the elvish land of Lorien, and down the great river Anduin, until they came to the falls of Rauros. Already they had become aware that their journey was watched by spies, and that the creature Gollum, who once had possessed the ring and still lusted for it, was following their trail. It now became necessary for them to decide whether they should turn east to Mordor, or go on with Boromir to the aid of Minas Tirith, chief city of Gondor, in the coming war, or should divide. When it became clear that the ring-bearer was resolved to continue his hopeless journey to the land of the enemy, Boromir attempted to seize the ring by force. The first part ended with the fall of Boromir to the lure of the ring, with the escape and the disappearance of Frodo and his servant Samwise, and the scattering of the remainder of the Fellowship by a sudden attack of orc soldiers, some in the service of the Dark Lord of Mordor, some of the traitor Saruman of Isengard. The quest of the ring-bearer seemed already overtaken by disaster. Let me just read chat here for a moment. Yeah, So that is a really good question, actually. So thanks very much as asking. There is a part where Smeagol is sort of the narrative voice, and he's sort of racked with doubt near Cirith Ungol while Frodo and Sam slept, and you're wondering who added that to the Red Book. Hey, Tommy. And Anons, how's it going? And the answer there would probably be Gandalf. Gandalf is the one who would sort of fill in these blanks, just sort of saying, well, I would think that this happened. And everybody sort of goes with what Gandalf says because he's always right. And if you read the title of Frodo's memoir, the Downfall of the Lord of the Rings and the Return of the King, it says that it is written by himself and Sam and some of their friends, but also with accounts of the wise. So I would say that Gandalf would be the one that would sort of fill in some of those blanks. Good catch there. That's very good. All right, let's continue here. The second part, books 3 and 4, The Two Towers, recounted the deeds of all the company after the breaking of the Fellowship of the Ring. Book 3 told of the repentance and death of Boromir, and of his funeral in a boat committed to the Falls of Rauros, of the capture of Meriadoc and Peregrine by orc soldiers, who bore them towards Isengard over the eastern plains of Rohan, and of their pursuit by Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. The riders of Rohan then appeared, a troop of horsemen led by Éomer the Marshal, surrounded the orcs on the borders of the forest of Fangorn and destroyed them. But the hobbits escaped into the wood, and there met Treebeard the Ent, secret master of Fangorn. In his company they witnessed the rousing of the wrath of the tree folk and their march on Isengard. In the meanwhile, Aragorn and his companions met Éomer returning from the battle. He provided them with horses, and they rode on into the forest. There, while searching in vain for the hobbits, they met Gandalf again, returned from death, now the White Rider, yet veiled still in grey. With him they rode over Rohan to the halls of King Theoden of the Mark, where Gandalf healed the aged king and rescued him from the spells of Wormtongue, his evil counsellor, secret ally of Saruman. They rode then with the king and his host against the forces of Isengard, and took part in the desperate victory of the Hornburg. Gandalf then led them to Isengard, and they found the great fortress laid in ruins by the tree folk, and Saruman and Wormtongue besieged to the indomitable tower of Orthanc. In the parley before the door, Saruman refused to repent, and Gandalf deposed him and broke his staff, leaving him to the vigilance of the Ents. From a high window, Wormtongue hurled a stone at Gandalf, but it missed him, and was picked up by Peregrine. This proved to be one of the 3 surviving Palantiri, the seeing stones of Númenor. Late at night, Peregrine succumbed to the lure of the stone. He stole it and looked in it, and so was revealed to Sauron. The book ended with the coming of a Nazgul over the plains of Rohan, a ring-wraith mounted on a flying steed, presage of imminent war. Gandalf delivered the Palantir to Aragorn, and taking Peregrine rode away to Minas Tirith. Oh, hey there, Wasted Quake Ranger. I answered one of your questions in the new episode as well. I don't know if you've seen episode 149 yet or not, that I just put up yesterday for members, but I got to your question there as well. We're on the synopsis here, talking about everything that has already happened. Book 4 turned to Frodo and Samwise, now lost in the bleak hills of Emyn Muil. It is told how they escaped from the hills and were overtaken by Smeagol Gollum, and how Frodo tamed Gollum and almost overcame his malice, so that Gollum led them through the dead marshes and ruined lands to the Morannon, the Black Gate of the land of Mordor in the north. There it was impossible to enter, and Frodo accepted Gollum's advice, to seek a secret entrance that he knew of, away south to the Mountains of Shadow, the western walls of Mordor. As they journeyed thither, they were taken by a scouting force of the men of Gondor, led by Faramir, brother of Boromir. Faramir discovered the nature of their quest, but resisted the temptation to which Boromir had succumbed, and sent them forward on the last stage of their journey to Cirith Ungol, the Spider's Pass, though he warned them that it was a place of mortal peril, of which Gollum had told them less than he knew. Even as they reached the crossroads and took the path to the ghastly city of Minas Morgul, a great darkness issued from Mordor, covering all the lands. Then Sauron sent forth his first army, led by the Black King of the Ringwraiths. The War of the Ring had begun. Gollum guided the hobbits to a secret way that avoided Minas Morgul. And in the darkness they came at last to Cirith Ungol. There Gollum fell back into evil and attempted to betray them to the monstrous guardian of the pass, Shelob. He was frustrated by the heroism of Samwise, who beat off his attack and wounded Shelob. The second part ends with the choices of Samwise. Frodo, stung by Shelob, lies dead as it seems. The quest must end in disaster, or Samwise must abandon his master. At length he takes the ring and attempts to carry on the hopeless quest alone, but just as he is about to cross into the land of Mordor, orcs come up from Minas Morgul and down from the tower of Cirith Ungol that guards the crown of the pass. Hidden by the ring, Samwise learns from the bickering of the orcs that Frodo is not dead, but drugged. Too late he pursues them, but the orcs carry off the body of Frodo down a tunnel leading to the rear gate of their tower. Samwise falls in a swoon before as it closes with a clang. This, the third and last part, will tell of the opposing strategies of Gandalf and Sauron until the final catastrophe and the end of the Great Darkness. We return first to the fortunes of battles of the West. Okay, let's get some water in me here. I could read you the dictionary and you'd say thank you. Well, thank you for saying that. You know, which the Oxford English Dictionary, I would assume. That's the one that Tolkien had some part in writing. A phone book. You still use phone books to sit on to drive. Okay, I understand. You would need them from the 90s to be thick enough to really elevate you, right? Now, thankfully, I won't have to do any orc voices today, Kits, because that's rough on my voice. That's rough on my voice. All right, the Return of the King. Now that we've synopsized and talked about this enough, let's start with Chapter 1 of Book 5, Minas Tirith. You're short? There's nothing wrong with that. You're just you don't say you're short. You're hobbit size. There you go. Pippin looked out from the shelter of Gandalf's cloak. He wondered if he had been asleep or still sleeping, still in the swift-moving dream in which he had been wrapped so long since the great ride began. The dark world was rushing by, and the wind sang loudly in his ears. He could see nothing but the wheeling stars, and away to his right vast shadows against the sky where the mountains of the south marched past. Sleepily he tried to reckon the times and stages of their journey, but his memory was drowsy and uncertain. There had been the first ride at terrible speed, without a halt, and then in the dawn he had seen a pale gleam of gold, and they had come to the silent town and the great empty house on the hill. And hardly had they reached its shelter when the winged shadow passed over her once again, and men wilted with fear. But Gandalf had spoken soft words to him, and he had slept in a corner, tired but uneasy, dimly aware of comings and goings, and of men talking and Gandalf giving orders. And then again riding in the night. This was the third night since he had looked in the stone. And with that hideous memory he woke fully and shivered, and the noise of the wind became filled with menacing voices. A light kindled in the sky, a blaze of yellow fire behind dark barriers. Pippin cowered back, afraid for a moment, wondering into what dreadful country Gandalf was bearing him. He rubbed his eyes and saw that it was the moon rising above the eastern shadows, now almost at the full. So the night was not yet old enough. Let's try that again. So the night was not yet old, and for hours the dark journey would go on. He stirred and spoke. "Where are we, Gandalf?" he asked. "In the realm of Gondor," the wizard answered. "The land of Anorion is still passing by." There was a silence again for a while. Then, "What is that?" cried Pippin suddenly, clutching at Gandalf's cloak. "Look! Fire! Red fire! Are there dragons in this land? Look, there is another." For answer, Gandalf cried aloud to his horse, "On, Shadowfax! We must hasten. Time is short. See, the beacons of Gondor are alight, calling for aid. War is kindled. See, there is the fire on Amon Din, and flame on Eilenach. And there they go speeding west, Nardol, Erlus, Min, Rimmon, Calanad, and the Halifirian and the borders of Rohan." But Shadowfax paused in his stride, slowing to a walk, and then he lifted up his head and neighed. And out of the darkness the answering neigh of other horses came, and presently the thudding of hoofs was heard. And 3 riders swept up and passed like flying ghosts in the moon, and vanished into the west. Then Shadowfax gathered himself together and sprang away, as the night flowed over him like a roaring wind. Let's talk about this bit here. Let me also catch up on chat here. You wish you could add likes to all the cool comments. Well, I mean, you could just mash on the like button, I guess, when things happen, right? I would love to do audiobooks. I would absolutely love to do audiobooks. So a few interesting things here. And this is something that the films did differently. We have to just very briefly talk about the films. Because the film version of The Return of the King actually has my favorite change. A lot of times we talk about changes from book to film as in they are negative, but sometimes they're not negative. Sometimes there are good changes. And one good change was actually getting to see the beacons being lit. Now, the purpose of the beacons was actually very different in the films than it was in the book. In the film, they were lighting the beacons specifically to call from aid from Rohan. However, in the book, that is not the case. There is a separate mechanism to call for aid from Rohan. And that has actually already happened. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But what the beacons are doing is Gondor is a big country, and there's lots of cities, and there's lots of like little principalities throughout the land. And what these beacons are doing is saying, all hands on deck, send all your troops to Minas Tirith. We're at war. So basically, Gondor is calling for aid from Gondor. They're basically saying, everybody, all the different lords and princes throughout the lands of Ted, thank you for subscribing with your one and only Prime for 64 months. Thank you so much. To all coalesce their power at Minas Tirith, because Minas Tirith is really the last bastion of defense that Gondor has. Osgiliath was a very important choke point. It was over a river. It is strategically really important. The enemy has that now. Minas Tirith is naturally fortified, and it's sort of like the last bastion of hope here. Now, I mentioned that there is another way for them to ask Rohan for help, and that is where they will send a messenger to Rohan, and they will present the king of Rohan with a ceremonial red arrow, and that is saying, hey, we need you to help us out here. And Zach, thank you for subscribing with your Prime as well. Is that the same Zach? Yeah, okay, so I see you're watching me on both Twitch and Facebook. Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. Twitch and YouTube. So thank you for using your Prime to sub over there. And it is true, anybody who has Amazon Prime, by the way, if you have Amazon Prime, that means you have Twitch Prime, and you could subscribe to my Twitch for free, which is really cool. Osgoniath. So anyway, the horses that they passed. Are we in a hype chain right now? Oh, we have a hype train going on the Twitch side. Moogle, you know what to do when there's a hype train, right? Could you take care of that for me, please? Okay, so we're having a hype train. So anybody who subscribes during the hype train or cheers 100 bits or more or gives a gift subscription, they will be part of the hype train, and you get a free emote at the end of it, which you can keep forever on Twitch. So if you could just let them know on Discord as well that there is a hype train going on Twitch right now. Anyway, so one of the interesting things is that Pippin's like, look, what is that? Is there fire? There's dragons or something? And Gandalf realizes if the beacons are lit, things are really dire. So he urges Shadowfax to step it up. And then Shadowfax doesn't do that, because even though Gandalf and Shadowfax have bonded, they're very close to each other, he's not Shadowfax's master. Shadowfax is his own master. He is Lord of the Mayoress, after all. So what happens is he slows down, and for good reason. He's greeting the horses that are coming in the opposite direction, which are 3 men of Gondor. One of them is a fellow by the name of Hirgon, and they're actually headed to Rohan. They're going to go straight to Theoden and present that red arrow. So right now we see the beacons are lit. The red arrow is on its way to Meduseld, and a lot of things are happening. And meanwhile, Pippin's just like, hey, what's going on, man? You know? All right, let's continue here. Pippin became drowsy again and paid little attention to Gandalf telling him of the customs of Gondor, and how the lord of the city had beacons built on the tops of outlying hills along both borders of the Great Range, and maintained posts at these points where fresh horses were always in readiness to bear his errand riders to Rohan in the north or to Belfalis in the south. It is long since the beacons of the north were lit, he said, and in the ancient days of Gondor they were not needed, for they had the 7 stones. Pippin stirred uneasily. Sleep again and do not be afraid, said Gandalf. For you are not going, like Frodo, to Mordor, but to Minas Tirith, and there you will be as safe as you can be anywhere in these days. If Gondor falls, or if the ring is taken, then the Shire will be no refuge. You do not comfort me, said Pippin, but nonetheless sleep crept over him. The last thing he remembered before he fell into the deep dream was a glimpse of high white peaks, glimmering like floating isles above the clouds as they caught the light of the westering moon. He wondered where Frodo was, and if he was already in Mordor, or if he was dead, and he did not know that Frodo, from far away, looked on that same moon as it set beyond Gondor ere the coming of the day. Oh, the hunt for Gollum. Yeah, you know what? Actually, if I was going to be involved in a film like the one after that is the one that I would really like to consult on. Although the man that they have writing it, Stephen Colbert, he's very, very knowledgeable, so I trust that he's going to get a lot of things right. But they're doing The Shadow of the Past, I could be a blue wizard. Would I be Alatar or Palando? The blue wizards are interesting. I did talk about them sort of recently in episode 149 because somebody was wondering, this was on Quora, if the existence of the blue wizard violates the principle of Chekhov's gun, which it does not, by the way. But of course you could watch that video for that. Let's continue here. Yeah, Stephen Colbert is writing it. I don't know exactly. I believe Peter Jackson is going to direct it, or at least produce it. All right, Hype Train's finished. Do we get an emote, or? It hasn't told me about an emote just yet. It might take a while. Yes, Dan Pillow was the artist on that Blue Wizards picture. A lot of people draw the Blue Wizards in some very, very interesting ways, and I try my hardest when I'm looking for pictures to look for ones that I haven't used a whole bunch of times there, you know. But anyway, Matt says the Blue Wizards can learn enemy attacks. Is a reference. I know the reference. That's blue magic in Final Fantasy. I know that reference. All right, let's continue here. Pippin woke to the sound of voices. Another day of hiding and a night of journey had fleeted by. It was twilight. The cold dawn was at hand again, and chill grey mists were about them. Shadowfax stood, steaming with sweat, but he held his neck proudly and showed no sign of weariness. Many tall men, heavily cloaked, stood beside him, and behind him in the mist loomed a wall of stone. Partly ruinous, it seemed, but already before the night was past the sound of hurried labour could be heard. Beat of hammers, clink of trowels, and the creak of wheels. Torches and flares glowed dully here and there in the fog. Gandalf was speaking to the men that barred his way, and as he listened, Pippin became aware that he himself was being discussed. Yea, truly we know you, Mithrandir, said the leader of the men. And you know the passwords of the 7 gates, and are free to go forward. But we do not know your companions. What is he, a dwarf out of the mountains in the north? We wish for no strangers in this land at this time, unless they be mighty men of arms in whose faith and help we can trust. I will vouch for him before the seat of Denethor, said Gandalf. And as for valor that cannot be computed by stature, he has passed through more battles and perils than you have in gold, though you twice his height. And he comes now from the storming of Isengard, in which we bear tidings, and great weariness is on him, or I would wake him. His name is Peregrine, a very valiant man. Man, said Ingold dubiously, and the others laughed. Man, cried Pippin, now thoroughly roused. Man, indeed not. I am a hobbit, and no more valiant than I am a man, save perhaps now and again by necessity. Do not let Gandalf deceive you. Many a doer of great deeds might say no more, said Ingold. But what is a hobbit? A halfling, answered Gandalf. Nay, not the one that was spoken of, he added, seeing the wonder in the men's faces, and, oh, Reaver, thank you for using your Prime sub over as well. Thank you. And Worms are cool, thank you. If you could just, on Thursdays when I'm doing a Tolkien thing, just keep it PG if you can. Not a big deal, please do that, but thank you. Thank you, everybody, for subscribing and everything. Let me actually pause here, because I wanted to talk about this, actually. This is really cool. There's a great little literary reference here to a story that wasn't released until far later. Now, Ingold here, who is acting as sort of a guardsman to make sure that nobody gets too close to Minas Tirith, who's not supposed to, is like, okay, Gandalf, we know you, although he's calling him Mithrandir, because that is the Elvish word that means the gray pilgrim. And I could go into what that means. Myth is gray. Randir is one who walks the land with a special purpose, which is a pilgrim. But what's going on here is in Gondor, they actually do speak Sindarin as their official language. And even though most people speak Westron, which is English in the books, they lapse into a lot of Gondor Sindarin. As a matter of fact, even the word Rohan is Gondor Sindarin for the Land of Horses. In actual, like, Elvish Sindarin, it would be Rochand. So it's like Rochiand, Rochand. Very hard to pronounce. So it's sort of the Mannish dialect there. But here's the literary reference, and let's see. Do I know Elvish? Do you think I might know a little bit of Elvish? I know quite a lot of Quenya and just a bit of Sindarin, enough Sindarin to get by, but I'm more interested in Quenya. Languages and linguistics are my specialty when it comes to Tolkien scholarship. But he mentions the passwords to the 7 gates. Now, let's see who gets this right in either version of the chat, whether you're watching me on YouTube or whether you're watching me on Twitch. What is he referencing when he mentions passing through 7 gates to get to Minas Tirith, the walled city of Minas Tirith, the last bastion of hope against the Dark Lord? And there are 7 gates that Gandalf is going through here. This is a really important reference. Let's see if anybody knows what that is. And while you guys are hopefully typing in your guesses. Yes! Okay, Dylan knows it. I'm going to grab the book right now. Yes, it's a reference to Gondolin here. I have The Fall of Gondolin here. Thank you for the subscription there from Stephen Biggs. Thank you very much. Yes, there are 7 gates that Tur goes through to reach the city of Gondolin. And, of course, he is sent there by the Valar, by Ulmo, the Lord of Water. So there you go. And ascending to the 7 districts. And now, why is the number 7 so important in Gondolin and in Minas Tirith? Because the number 7 is incredibly important in all cultures. And it has to do with a constellation that the elves called the Vala Kirka, which is Sickle of the Valar. But there are a lot of names for it. The Wain, the Plow, the Bear, the Big Dipper, Durin's Crown. And it represents a lot of different things, but the number 7 crops up a lot. We see it a lot. It's really especially important in 2 cultures. One is, of course, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, because there were 7 fathers of the dwarves and 7 dwarf lords of the 7 types of dwarf that exist. Even though we mostly know one type of dwarf, which are called the Longbeards, there are 6 other types. However, the other culture that 7 stars became incredibly important is actually Númenor. And yes, the sickle that Varda threw up in defiance of Morgoth because he couldn't reach them, he was earthbound. He was earthbound. So when you look up and you see the Big Dipper, one of the easiest constellations to see, this is literally in defiance of the devil. That's what's going on there, at least according to Tolkien. And hey there, Mysterious Stumpy. So anyway, so the number 7 and the sickle of the Valor and all this, incredibly important, and we're going to see it happen a lot and especially in the Return of the King. You're going to see this number 7 and the theme of 7 stars come up in reference to things having to do with Númenor. And Gondor is, of course, one of the remnants of Númenor. Does anyone know if Minas Ithil also had 7 points in the books to reflect Minas Anar's 7 tears, or was that purely for the Jackson films? That's purely for the Jackson films. But the number 7 crops up in a lot of other great ways. The fact that he did do 7 tears is a great nod, though. That was just Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson got a lot of things right, and even when he was doing things that were, we'll say, extracurricular, he was doing it with a good mind. There's a few things that I disagree with him strongly on, but not that. His depiction of Minas Tirith, really good. All right, let's continue here. Oh, I'm over here, actually. Yes, and one who journeyed with him, said Pippin, and Boromir of your city was with us, and he saved me in the snows of the north. And at the last he was slain, defending me from many foes. Peace, said Gandalf. The news of that grief should have been told first to the father. It has been guessed already, said Ingold, for there have been strange portents here of late. But pass on quickly now, for the Lord of Minas Tirith will be eager to see any that bear the latest tidings of his son, be he man or... Hobbit, said Pippin, little service can I offer to your lord, but what I can do I would do, remembering Boromir the Brave. Fare you well, said Ingold, and the men made way for Shadowfax, and he passed through a narrow gate in the wall. May you bring good counsel to Denethor in his need, and to us all, Mithrandir, Ingold cried. But you come with tidings of grief and danger, as is your wont, they say. Because I come seldom, but when my help is needed, answered Gandalf. And as for counsel, to you I would say that you are overlate in repairing the wall of the Pelennor. Courage will now be your best defence against the storm that is at hand. That and such hope as I bring. For not all the tidings that I bring are evil. But leave your trowels and sharpen your swords. The work will be finished ere evening, said Ingold. This is the last portion of the wall to be put in defence. The least open to attack, for it looks towards our friends of Rohan. Do you know aught of them? Will they answer the summons, think you? Yes, they will come. But they have fought many battles at your back. This road and no road looks towards safety any longer. Be vigilant. But for Gandalf Stormcrow, you would have seen a host of foes coming out of Anorian, and no riders of Rohan, and you may yet. Very well, and sleep not. Gandalf passed now into the wide land beyond the Ramashechor. So the men of Gondor called the outwall that had been built with great labour after Ithilien fell under the shadow of their enemy. For 10 leagues or more it ran from the mountain's feet and so back again, enclosing in its fence the fields of the Pelennor, fair and fertile townlands on the long slopes and terraces falling to the deep levels of the Anduin. At its furthest point from the great gate of the city, northeastward, the wall was 4 leagues distant, and there was a frowning bank that overlooked the long flats beside the river, and men had made it high and strong, for at that point, upon a walled causeway, the road came in from the fords and the bridges of Osgiliath. and passed through a guarded gate between embattled towers. At its nearest point the wall was little more than 1 league from the city, and that was southeastward. There Anduin, going in a wide knee about the hills of Emin Arnin in South Ithilien, bent sharply west, and the outwall rose upon its very brink, and beneath it lay the quays and landings of the Harlond for craft that came upstream from the southern fiefs. I need to drink water here. I could say one very nice thing about the Hobbit films. The music direction was very good. I liked especially my favorite scene, the dwarves singing in Bilbo's house, the 2 songs, one about That's What Bilbo Baggins Hates, and of course Beyond the Misty Mountains Cold. But yeah, the depiction of Radagast is just, oh my God, You know what's interesting is the gentleman that played him, Sylvester McCoy, was actually Peter Jackson's first choice to play Gandalf, which obviously didn't happen. But yeah, not a very respectful depiction of Radagast the Brown. Absolutely not. There are a few good things here and there in the Hobbit films, but mostly it's tough to get through. It's very tough to get through. All right, we're going to continue here. You wish we got more of Bjorn. Oh, especially how important Bjorn actually is. They really did him dirty, I feel. We needed less Azog, and by less Azog, I mean no Azog at all, and more Bjorn. The townlands were rich, with wide tilth and many orchards, and homesteads there were with oast and garner, fold and byre, and many rills rippling through the green from the highlands down to Anduin. Now I have to stop to point out again, and this especially happens when he starts describing this scenery. What should Radagast have looked like? He should look like St. Francis of Assisi. That's if you Google what St. Francis of Assisi looked like, that's basically the way that Tolkien described Radagast as looking like in his letters. So there you go. Oh, don't worry, Deb. I understood what you meant by spine tingling there. You wonder if Bjorn listens to Bjork. Well, you know. But anyway, that's pretty fun. I have to point out now the writing, and I did this a lot in The Two Towers, and I'm going to do it again here, and I'm going to remind you. I'm not going to point out every time that this happens, but I'm going to point it out now, and I want you guys, everybody that's listening, or maybe you're watching this later on YouTube or whatever, to keep an eye out for, especially when Tolkien starts getting descriptive, look for double alliteration and triple alliteration, which is his reference to the sort of prose poetry that we saw in the Middle Ages and even earlier than that as well. And we see it here with rills rippling. You know, so you're going to start to see that double. By the way, double alliteration is when the alliteration is like right next to each other. They're not separated by any words. And sometimes you'll see it separated when it's triple alliteration, but you're going to see it happen a lot. You're going to see in sentences the double and triple alliteration, especially when he gets descriptive. Like I said, I'm not going to point out every time it happens, but it's one of those things that once you notice it, you're not going to be able to not notice it. So, by the way, Feanor did not have a lisp. It's actually a bit weirder than that. The reason that Feanor was opposed to changing the thorn symbol sound, the th sound, to an S in the Quenya language was because he didn't like the way that it would change the way that his mother's name was pronounced. And since she had voluntarily died and she was in Mandos, she couldn't be there to sort of like stick up for her name, you know, so he thought it would sound really bad. And what's interesting, though, about the Shibboleth of Feanor, because that's what you're referencing there, thanks very much, is that many of the lore masters of the elves actually agreed with Feanor. They thought he was right, but they still opposed his shibboleth. They still opposed it simply because they didn't like him. So that actually is a really realistic thing that happens in the Silmarillion and in supplementary material, as it does happen in real life, is that sometimes a person could have an excellent point. They could say something and just be 100% true and correct. And you're like, yeah, but I don't like you. You know, a person's such a jerk, you know, that you don't go along with anything they say, even when they're right. So, but yeah, you did get a chuckle out of me there with that. I think classical music is what Daffy Duck listens to, actually. All right, let's continue. Otherwise, we're going to be on this chapter, which isn't the worst thing, right? We're not in any hurry. Yet the herdsmen and husbandmen... Let's try that again. Yet the herdsmen and husbandmen that dwelt there were not many, and the most part of the people of Gondor lived in the 7 circles of the city. So you see, it is 7 circles, not 7 tiers, right? But 7 circles. A lot of nepotism even back then. It's not exactly nepotism. Although I mean, when you're thinking of like people like Feanor who are royals, I mean that's sort of like the baked in nepotism. It's really more just like what's the word for it really? I mean, I know one phrase that's like kind of like obscene, so I won't say it. But it's just when you don't like someone so much that everything they do aggravates you, and you're just like, look at that elf out there eating crackers like he knows. You know what I mean? Elf eating crackers. I think you could figure out what I'm saying here. So like I said, it's 7 circles, not 7 tiers. What Peter Jackson did, which I think was smart, was that he built Minas Tirith up. And it made it look very compact and many layered and with all these different tiers and everything. And you just look at it and you just wonder about how do you even go about constructing a city like that. It's pretty marvelous. Whereas it should have been more wide, which is fine that he changed it. But that's where that reference came from, the 7 circles, which is also triple alliteration or double alliteration. Or in the high vales of the mountain borders, in Lasanar, or further south in fair Lebanon with its 5 swift streams. There dwelt a hardy folk between the mountains and the sea. They were reckoned men of Gondor, yet their blood was mingled, and they were short and swarthy folk among them, whose sires came more from the forgotten men who housed in the shadows of the hills in the dark years ere the coming of the kings. But beyond, in the great fief of Belfalas, dwelt Prince Imrahil in his castle of Dol Amroth by the sea, and he was of high blood, and his folk also tall men and proud, with sea-grey eyes. So this is our first, not really introduction because the character is not present, but our first mention of Prince Imrahil, who is going to become a key character going forward. Of course, he didn't make it into the movies. And also just really interesting that Tolkien takes the time to point out that Gondor is very diverse in its peoples because, yes, it's a lot of Númenórean blood, but also there were already people living in this part of the land before the Númenóreans came, and a lot of them intermarried with Númenor, so you see a lot of different sort of types of people. Not all of them are tall, not all of them are fair-skinned and such. But they are considered men of Gondor. Now, that's not to say that Gondor is like the perfect sort of, diverse utopia, because they've had a lot of problems in the past, and we're going to talk about this a lot more when we get to the appendices, because there was something called the kin strife. And what the kin strife was essentially a long series of civil wars within Gondor, where essentially what happened was they came to believe that their crown prince was not going to be a very good prince at all because they felt that he wasn't 100% Numenorian, and therefore he was going to be terrible. And so there was like a series of wars that happened called the Kinstrife. And it was one of their darkest periods. Let's continue here. Now, after Gandalf had ridden for some time, the light of day grew in the sky, and Pippin roused himself and looked up. To his left lay a sea of mist, rising to a bleak shadow in the east, but to his right great mountains reared their heads, ranging from the west to a steep and sudden end, as if in the making of the land the river had burst through a great barrier, carving out a mighty valley to a land of battle and debate in times to come. And there where the white mountains of Ered Nimrais came to their end he saw, as Gandalf had promised, the dark mass of Mount Mindolluin, the deep purple shadows of its high glens, and its tall face whitening in the rising day. And upon its outthrust knee was the guarded city, with its 7 walls of stone so strong and old that it seemed to have not been builded, but carven by giants out of the bones of the earth. Even as Pippin gazed in wonder, the walls passed from looming grey to white, blushing faintly in the dawn, and suddenly the sun climbed over the eastern shadow and sent forth a shaft that smote the face of the city. Then Pippin cried aloud, for the tower of Ecthelion, standing high within the topmost wall, shone out against the sky, glimmering like a spike of pearl and silver, tall and fair and shapely, and its pinnacle glittered as if it were wrought of crystals, and white banners broke and fluttered from the battlements in the morning breeze, and high and far I heard a clear ringing as of silver trumpets. So Gandalf and Peregrine rode to the great gate of the men of Gondor at the rising of the sun, and its iron doors rolled back before them. "Mithrandir! Mithrandir!" men cried. "Now we know that the storm is indeed nigh." "It is upon you," said Gandalf. "I have ridden on its wings. Let me pass. I must come to your Lord Denethor while his stewardship lasts. Whatever betide, you have come to the end of the Gondor that you have known. Let me pass." Then men fell back before the command of his voice and questioned him no further, though they gazed in wonder at the hobbit that sat before him, and at the horse that bore him. For the people of the city used horses very little, and they were seldom seen in the streets, save only those ridden by the errand riders of their lord. And they said, "Surely that is not one of the great steeds of the king of Rohan. Maybe the Rohirrim will come soon to strengthen us." But Shadowfax walked proudly up the long, winding road. You wish the Nightwish song, the Kinslayer, was about Feanor? I mean, it's not, but it certainly seems to reference that. By the way, were you the one that asked? I got a question. It was on a comment on YouTube. Let me bring that up, actually. Somebody had asked me specifically about music and bands and such that reference Tolkien, and I did answer that. Oh no, that was Mysterious Turnpie. Okay, I mean, they're like, you're probably familiar, but if you want like a whole album of Tolkien stuff, and if you like Nightwish, there's a band called Blind Guardian. They did an album called Nightfall in Middle Earth, which was about the Silmarillion. It doesn't tell the story of the Silmarillion. Yes, that was you. It doesn't tell you this. I didn't know you were in the chat. Hi. It doesn't tell the story in order. It sort of starts with the War of Wrath, and then goes backwards to all these other battles that Morgoth had, and it covers a lot of things. It doesn't really hit on every major story, and it actually sort of stops like right before the fall of Gondolin, which always made me wonder, are they going to do like a sequel? But that was back in the 90s, and they haven't done that. But there's a lot of, I mean, I could name heavy metal bands that are named after Tolkien things. All like there's a Gorgoroth, there's a Cirith Ungol, although they say it's pronounced Cirith Ungol. There's a terrible band, but there's one called Burzum, which they pronounce it differently, but it's Burzum, which is the black speech for darkness. There's a lot of them out there. An album is what made you aware of the Silmarillion. That's really interesting. I think I've met a lot of people who listened to Nightfall in Middle Earth and were like, "Oh, so I get it now," and they were able to follow along. Amon Amarth is another one. Amon Amarth. is referring to the Red Mountain, Mount Doom. That's what it's called in Sindarin, at least. Or Orodruin is another way of saying it. But Orodruin is literally Red Mountain, whereas Amon Amarth is Mount Doom, I believe. But yeah, there's so many of them. Like if you look at them, yeah, terrible band, CW Trade. Yeah, but Burzum is terrible. But and the guy who is in charge of the band is just absolute ninny hammer. But yeah. Did any of the posthumous published works go into further depth on the Black Númenórean wall around Minas Tirith, or left it a mystery? See, now that's interesting, because a lot of people say that the wall is black, and they say it's because it's compared to the Orthanc stone, the stone that makes up Orthanc. Although in this passage, it seemed to be described, at least by Pippin, as white, that it looked gray in sort of this pre-dawn, and then the sun hits it, and all of a sudden everything's gleaming white. Some people will still insist that the wall around the city is black. It doesn't really matter. But either way, the men of Númenor had some, like, you have to remember that Númenor was essentially Tolkien's Atlantis. They really knew what they were doing in building things. So there you go. Let's start a band. I would, Minas Morgul, that's another one. I have no musical talent whatsoever. I mean, I did a thing where I did like a half passable, like, impression of Jay Mascis singing once, because I was doing like a spoof of one of his songs, but that wasn't meant to sound good. It was meant to be funny, you know. But I don't really have. I'll produce it. I can do that, right? Actually, one of my hobbies is remixing and remastering albums. But anyway, there's so many people here that I haven't said hi to Joe and to Max, and hi to everybody. I can be the singer. So I'm gonna sing like this, you know. But Mysterious Turn By, I highly recommend, though, that, because I mentioned a song in my reply to you. I mentioned a few. Well, I mentioned Havard. I definitely recommend Havard. There's only one album. It's called Havard. It's almost all instrumental except for one song that has vocals. Listen to that. That's very Silmarillion music to me. But also, I mentioned the Flaming Lips. They had a song called Battling Voices from Beyond, which, I mean, if you listen to that, to me, that is everything that starts in the Chamber of Mazarbul in Moria and then goes on through Gandalf fighting the Balrog. So there you go. Oh, it's 2 a.m. where you are. Okay. Well, yep, it'll be there for you. Let's continue on, guys. Like I said, I could just talk to you guys for hours, which is fun, but we should do the Return of the King here. But yeah, I did want to mention that, like, I just want to go back, because somebody asked about the Blackstone. It really does seem, to me at least, that it's actually white stone. But you know, a lot of people will insist that because it was compared to Orthanc. Oh yeah, Led Zeppelin had Ramble On, which is about Frodo. They also had Misty Mountain Hop, which isn't really about Tolkien, but is named after the Misty Mountains. They had a song called The Battle for Evermore that mentions the Ring Wraiths. So, yeah, Led Zeppelin had quite a few in there. There were probably more than that, you know. There's just so many out there, you know. All types of different music as well. I mentioned Rush. Rush had a song called Rivendell. What else did I say? I have my answer here. Actually, I think I've named all the ones that I mentioned. All right, but let's continue here. For the fashion of Minas Tirith was such that it was built on 7 levels, each delved into the hill, and about each was set a wall, and in each wall was a gate, but the gates were not set in a line. The great gate in the city wall was at the east point of the circuit, but the next faced half south, and the third half north, and so to and fro upwards, so that the paved way that climbed toward the citadel turned first this way and then that across the face of the hill. And each time that it passed the line of the great gate, it went through an arched tunnel, piercing a vast pier of rock whose huge outthrust bulk divided into all the circles of the city save the first. So let's talk about that, actually. So this is a really... Sons of the Riddermark, that's a good one. That's a really smart way to build a city. So what they're basically saying is that there are 7 circles and 7 gates, but you have to turn this way and you have to turn that way. And basically any sort of invading force is going to get lost, and they're not going to know the way, and that they're going to have to go this way and that way, and they're going to be just, absolutely bottlenecked and trapped in a way. It's not exactly the same as Gondolin. Gondolin was different, where it was sort of this spiral going around slowly upwards towards, where the city was, because you started at the foot of the mountains and then you go up into this. It's a valley, but it's still a higher elevation, and that there's all these gates and towers and everything, So there you have it. All right, let's continue here. Let's see. For partly in the primeval shaping of the hill, partly by the mighty craft and labour of old, there stood up from the rear of the wide court behind the gate a towering bastion of stone, its edge sharp as a ship keel facing east. Up it rose even to the level of the topmost circle, and there was crowned by a battlement, so that those in the citadel might, like mariners in a mountainous ship, look from its peak sheer down upon the gate 700 feet below. The entrance to the citadel also looked eastward, but was delved in the heart of the rock. Thence a long lamp-lit slope ran up to the 7th gate. Thus men reached at last the high court, and the palace of the fountain, before the feet of the white tower, tall and shapely, 50 fathoms from its base to the pinnacle, where the banner of the stewards floated 1,000 feet above the plain. So if you've read The Fall of Gondolin and if you've read The Fall of Numenor, you start to get the feeling, if you come back to The Return of the King and you listen to this description of it, that Gondor's capital city, it wasn't originally the capital city, but it is the capital city right this moment. Hold on a second. Wait, hold on. Moogle was asking me something. Sons of Riddermark is that's battle lore. There you go. Moogle, yeah, it is power metal. Moogle on the Twitch side of thing, he knows a lot about heavy metal. The design of Minas Tirith is very much sort of a marriage between, we mentioned Gondolin more than a few times, but not only Gondolin, but also Minas in Numenor. And it's interesting, I was just reading that part, too, about where Isildur snuck into the city when it was occupied, by Sauron's forces and stole the fruit of the tree there, and then had to fight his way out and nearly died, That was, I believe, the reading that I did in episode 149. But, the whole thing, coming to this great fountain where the tree is and everything, that's very much like a mixture of Numenor and Gondolin right there. Yeah, and absolutely, and the reason that this one is named the Tower of Ecthelion is because that was Denethor's father, Ecthelion, and if you look at the names of the line of the stewards, not all of them, but very many of them are named after First Age men and elves. And what's really interesting is that, of course, Denethor, his father was named Ecthelion, but his wife was Finduilas, who was Gil-galad's sister. So, I mean, there's a lot of that sort of thing happening in Gondor. As a matter of fact, I was even pointing out, there was somebody on Quora who was being a bit of a fool of a took, let's be honest, who was telling me that Tolkien never reused names. That there was only one instance of him reusing a name, and that was Glorfindel. Which is funny because Glorfindel wound up being the same character. not a different character. And I'm like, there's so many. He was saying this was the first time he ever reused a name, and I'm like, Elrond, Legolas. I mean, there's just so many. Ecthelion, Finduilas. There's 6 Luthians. There's a lot of Miriels. There's a lot of Firiels. It's just insane how many times. And I said, you know what? There's like 4 characters named Hurin, and 2 of them have a son named Turin. Now, how confusing is that? How confusing is that? Yeah, it's he has to sit there and say, okay, is the characters that I'm introducing here in the Fellowship of the Ring, are they the same ones from the Fall of Gondolin? Okay, the decision was different Galdor, different Legolas, same Elrond, same Glorfindel. But then it's like, oh no, Glorfindel died. I have to figure that out, and that's where we get a lot of the lore from, So there you have that. But let's continue here. The end. Oh, I think I read that part already. Yes, I have to change. Right. A strong citadel it was indeed, and not to be taken by a host of enemies, if there were any within that could hold weapons, unless some foe could come behind and scale the lower skirts of Mindoluin, and so come upon the narrow shoulder that joined the hill of Guard to the mountain mass. But that shoulder, which rose to the height of the 5th wall, was hedged with great ramparts, right up to the precipice that overhung its west end, and in that space stood the houses and domed tombs of bygone kings and lords, forever silent between the mountain and the tower. Just to mention a bit of linguistics here, and going back to my earlier point, is he mentions, the mountain, Mindoluin, meeting the hill of Guard, and that is capitalized. Hill of Guard, if we translate that to Sindarin, becomes Minas Tirith. And what's interesting is that even the city itself, Minas Tirith, is named after a tower, a very important tower from Beren and Luthien from the First Age, in Beleriand. So, of course, the city was not always called the Hill of Guard. It was not always Minas Tirith. It was once the Tower of the Sun. It was Minas Anor, but right now it's Minas Tirith. Pippin gazed in growing wonder at the great stone city, vaster and more splendid than anything he had dreamed of, greater and stronger than Isengard, and far more beautiful. Yet it was in truth failing year by year to decay, and already it lacked half the men that could have dwelt at ease there. In every street they passed some great house or court, over whose doors and arched gates were carved many fair letters of strange and ancient shapes, names Pippin guessed of great men and kindreds that had once dwelt there. And yet now they were silent, and no footsteps rang on their wide pavements, nor voice was heard in their halls, nor any face looked out from door or empty window. At last they came out of the shadow of the 7th gate, and the warm sun that shone down beyond the river as Frodo walked in the glades of Ithilien glowed here on the smooth walls and rooted pillars and the great arch with keystone carven in the likeness of a crowned and kingly head. Gandalf dismounted, for no horse was allowed in the citadel, and Shadowfax suffered himself to be led away at the soft words of his master. The guards of the gate were robed in black, and their helms were of strange shape, high crowned with long cheek guards close fitting to the face, and above the cheek guards were set the white wings of sea-birds. But the helms gleamed with a flame of silver, for they were indeed wrought of mithril, heirlooms from the glory of old days. Upon the black surcoats were embroidered in white a tree blossoming like snow beneath a silver crown and many pointed stars. This was the livery of the heirs of Elendil, and none wore it now in all Gondor save for the guards of the citadel before the court of the fountain where the white tree once had grown. Already it seemed that word of their coming had gone before them, and at once they were admitted silently and without question. Quickly Gandalf strode across the white-paved court. A sweet fountain played there in the morning sun, and a sward of bright green lay about it, but in the midst, drooping over the pool, stood a dead tree, and the falling drops dripped sadly from its barren and broken branches back into the clear water. Right there, quadruple alliteration in that line there. Barren and broken branches back. So, like I said, it's one of these things that I'm going to point it out occasionally, and once you hear it, you'll never unhear it. You're going to notice it every time it happens. It's like saying there can only be one John in the world. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess what the person was saying was not that there can only be, like one Legolas, for example, but that Tolkien didn't typically do that. And he did it quite a lot, as a matter of fact, quite a lot. And the other Legolas, by the way, if you're wondering about him, he got out of Gondolin, he did survive, and then he sailed to the west, and he lived in Tol Eressëa, and because they speak Quenya in the Undying Lands more than Sindarin, he translated his name, so he became Legolas, which is the Quenya form of Legolas. Already it seemed that word of their coming had gone before them, and at once they were admitted, silently and without question. Quickly Gandalf strode across the white-paved court. A sweet fountain played there in the morning sun, and a sward of bright green lay about it. Oh, I already read this part, but we'll continue. But in the midst, drooping over the pool, stood a dead tree, and the falling drops dripped sadly from its barren and broken branches back into the clear water. Pippin glanced at it as he hurried after Gandalf. It looked mournful, he thought, and he wondered why the dead tree was left in this place where everything else was well tended. 7 stars and 7 stones and 1 white tree. The words that Gandalf had murmured came back into his mind. And then he found himself at the doors of the great hall beneath the gleaming tower, and behind the wizard he passed the tall, silent door wardens and entered the cool, echoing shadows of the House of Stone. And by the way, we talked earlier about Rohan, and the word Rohan and how it means the land of horses. Gondor actually means the land of stone. So it sort of explains why so much is made out of stone, because it's a very rocky land, and they probably have a great many quarries in Gondor, and that's like probably their chief thing there is stone. They walked down a paved passage, long and empty, and as they went, Gandalf spoke softly to Pippin. "Be careful of your words, Master Peregrine. This is no time for hobbit pertness. Theoden is a kindly old man. Denethor is of another sort, proud and subtle. A man of far greater lineage and power, though he is not called a king. But he will speak most to you and question you much, since you can tell him of his son Boromir. He loved him greatly, too much perhaps, and the more so because they were unlike. But under cover of this love he will think it easier to learn what he wishes from you rather than from me. Do not tell him more than you need, and leave quiet the matter of Frodo's errand. I will deal with that in due time. And say nothing about Aragorn either, unless you must." "Why not? What is wrong with Strider?" Pippin whispered. "He's meant to come here, didn't he? And he'll be arriving soon himself, anyway." Maybe, said Gandalf. "Though if he comes, it is likely to be in some way that no one expects, not even Denethor. It will be better so. At least he should come unheralded by us." Gandalf halted before a tall door of polished metal. "See, Master Pippin, there is no time to instruct you now in the history of Gondor, though it might have been better if you had learned something of it when you were still bird-nesting and playing truant in the woods of the Shire. Do as I bid. It is scarcely wise, when bringing the news of the death of his heir to a mighty lord, to speak overmuch of the coming of one who will, if he comes, claim the kingship. Is that enough?" "Kingship?" said Pippin, amazed. "Yes," said Gandalf. "If you have walked all these days with closed ears and mind asleep, wake up now." He knocked on the door. The door opened, but no one could be seen to open it. Pippin looked into a great hall. It was lit by deep windows in the wide aisles at either side, beyond the rows of tall pillars that upheld the roof. Monoliths of black marble that rose to great capitals carved in many strange figures of beasts and leaves. And far above, in shadow, the wide vaulting gleamed with dull gold, inset with flowing traceries of many colors. No hangings, no storied webs, nor any things of woven stuff or of wool, or of wood were to be seen in that long, solemn hall. But between the pillars there stood a silent company of tall images graven in cold stone. Suddenly Pippin was reminded of the hewn rocks of Argonath, and awe fell upon him as he looked down that avenue of kings long dead. At the far end, upon a dais of many steps, was set a high throne under a canopy of marble shaped like a crowned helm. Behind it was carved upon the wall and set with gems an image of a tree in flower, but the throne was empty. At the foot of the dais, upon the lowest step, which was broad and deep, there was a stone chair, black and unadorned, and on it sat an old man gazing at his lap. In his hand was a white rod with a golden knob. He did not look up. Solemnly they paced the long floor toward him until they stood 3 paces from his footstool. Then Gandalf spoke. "Hail, Lord and Steward of Minas Tirith, Denethor, son of Ecthelion. I am come with counsel and tidings in this dark hour." Then the old man looked up. Pippin saw his carven face with its proud bones and skin like ivory, and the long, curved nose between the dark, deep eyes, and he was reminded not so much of Boromir as of Aragorn. "Dark indeed is the hour," said the old man, "and at such times you are wont to come, Mithrandir. But though all the signs forbade that the doom of Gondor is drawing nigh, less now to me is that darkness than my own darkness. It has been told to me that you bring with you one who saw my son die. Is this he?" "It is," said Gandalf. "One of the twain. The other is with Theoden of Rohan, and may come hereafter. Halflings they are, as you see, yet this is not he." "Yet a halfling still," said Denethor grimly. "And little love do I bear the name, since those accursed words came to trouble our counsels and drew away my son on the wild errand to his death. My Boromir. Now we have need of you. Faramir should have gone in his stead." "He would have gone," said Gandalf. "But be not unjust in your grief. Boromir claimed the errand and would not suffer any other to have it. He was a masterful man, and one to take what he desired. I journeyed far with him and learned much of his mood, but you speak of his death. You have had news on that ere we came?" "Yes, I have received this," said Denethor, and laying down his rod he lifted from his lap the thing that he had been gazing at. In each hand he held up one half of a great horn cloven through the middle, a wild ox horn bound with silver. "That is the horn that Boromir always wore," cried Pippin. "Verily," said Denethor. "And in my turn I bore it, and so did each eldest son of our house far back into the vanished years before the failing of the kings. Since Vorondil, father of Mardil, hunted the wild kine of Aror in the far fields of Rhûn. I heard it blowing dim upon the northern marches 13 days ago, and the river brought it to me, broken. It will wind no more." He paused, and there was a heavy silence. Suddenly he turned his black glance upon Pippin. "What say you to that, halfling?" 13 days, faltered Pippin. "Yes, I think that would be so. Yes, I stood beside him as he blew the horn. But no help came, only more orcs." "So," said Denethor, looking keenly at Pippin's face. "You were there. Tell me more. Why did no help come? And how did you escape, and yet he did not so mighty a man as he was, and only orcs to withstand him?" Pippin flushed and forgot his fear. "The mightiest man may be slain by one arrow," he said, "and Boromir was pierced by many. When last I saw him, he sank beside a tree, and plucked a black-feathered shaft from his side. Then I swooned and was made captive. I saw him no more, and knew no more. But I honour his memory, for he was very valiant. He died to save us, my kinsman Meriadoc and myself, waylaid in the woods by the soldiery of the Dark Lord, and though he fell and failed, my gratitude is none the less." Okay. Yes, let's talk about the horn, because I wanted to go over that. So he mentions hunted the wild kine of Aror in the far fields of Rhûn. Rhûn is, of course, the east. Kine is just sort of an old-fashioned word for an ox, a kine, right? Aror is actually the Sindarin name of one of the Valar that we know as Oroma. So he's just saying that these were Oroma's oxen, or that he created these ox, and that's one of their horns is what the horn of Gondor was made from. Okay. All right, let's continue here. I also like, by the way, that he's like, well, yeah, orcs, so what? You know, like how come Boromir's dead when there were only orcs, you know? And it's the great value Valaroma. I mean, you know, you're probably right on that. That's actually really, really astute to say that, because battle horns have like a really, really big part of every one of Tolkien's stories. And the Valaroma is sort of the original battle horn, which would have been much, much larger. And that's the one that, you know, made Melkor quiver with fear when he heard it blowing. But I love this sort of look where he's like, well, how come Boromir's dead when there were only orcs? I mean, come on, orcs. He deals with orcs all the time, you know? And Pippin sort of has to bring him back to reality, because he's built up his son as almost this mythical figure who cannot be harmed. And he says, hey, look, man, it takes only like one arrow to kill most guys, and this guy, he took a lot of arrows, you know? So, yeah, I just love this when I'm just going to read that part again, what he said exactly. And how did you escape? And yet he did not, so mighty a man as he was, and only orcs to withstand him. Like, what are orcs, right? Like, come on. You know, points out a good thing. Like, a mighty man like Boromir, a melee fighter, you have to get close to him for him to fight you. The orcs were using arrows. They were far away, so... Well, not that far away, but, you know, they were able to hit him with arrows before they got near him, and he still killed a lot of them, which really does prove how tough he was, but... You know, Denethor is sort of in his own feelings right now, which is completely understandable considering what he's been through. And by the way, this is where Peter Jackson went awry. When he says Faramir should have gone instead, Peter Jackson misunderstood that line. He thought that what Denethor is saying is, well, if one of my sons was going to die, I'd rather it be the other guy. Boromir was my favorite. That other one, you know. And that's not the case. He's very tough on Faramir in this book. And the reason that he's very tough on Faramir in this book is twofold. One is because he's the second son that had no plans to become the steward, and then all of a sudden he is now the only son who must become the steward, and so Denethor is going to try to whip him into shape a little bit, not that he needs it. And the other is because Faramir is really close to Gandalf, and let me tell you something. If you thought Saruman didn't like Gandalf, Denethor really, really doesn't like Gandalf. And we're going to talk a lot about the Denethor and Gandalf dynamic, not right now, but when we get to the appendix, and especially when we read Unfinished Tales, we're going to talk a lot about that. But for right now, it's really, you know, he's seeing him as sort of his wizard's pupil, but he's not saying, I wish my other son died. He's not saying that. What he's saying is, Faramir wouldn't have died. You know what I mean? Because he knows Boromir was the kind of guy who rushed straight into battle. As a matter of fact, if Pippin was allowed to sit here and talk to Denethor as much as he would have liked to, Pippin probably would have sat there and told Denethor all of the crazy, brave things that Boromir did, including the fact that at one point he charged at a Balrog. And I think that Denethor would have just been over the moon thinking, my son did that. My son charged a Balrog and lived. He didn't live after that, but wow, what a thing to happen, you know? And not only that, but that when Boromir, and I talked about this when it happened, when Boromir blew his horn when he charged up to the Balrog, it paused for a moment. He was like, it stopped for a moment, the Balrog. So that's like a really, really, really big feat that Boromir has that I feel like nobody talks about. Certainly not Pippin, who has been told to just say less at this point. But yeah, he, like I said, he's not saying that Faramir would be preferable to lose over Boromir. He's saying Faramir would have survived. You know, because Faramir was the smart one. He's the wizard's pupil. Yes, Faramir is the one that is like Denethor. Denethor and Faramir are like the same guy. That's something that that Peter Jackson didn't understand. And Gandalf already pointed out that part of the reason why Denethor loves Boromir so much is because they're so different from each other. They're not like each other at all. And I have always had the theory that Boromir might take after his mother, Finduilas, more, and that's why his father is that way about him, because this is a reminder of his late wife, who died very young. But there you have it. All right, let's continue onwards here. Then Pippin looked at the old man in the eye, for pride stirred strangely within him, still stung by the scorn and suspicion in that cold voice. Little service, no doubt, will so great a lord of men think to find in a hobbit, a halfling from the northern shire, yet such as it is I will offer it in payment of my debt. Twitching aside his grey cloak, Pippin drew forth his small sword and laid it at Denethor's feet. A pale smile, like a gleam of cold sun on a winter's evening, passed over the old man's face. But he bent his head and held out his hand, laying the shards of the horn inside. "Give me the weapon," he said. Pippin lifted it and presented the hilt to him. "Whence came this?" said Denethor. "Many, many years lie on it. Surely this is a blade wrought by our own kindred in the north of the deep past?" "It came out of the mountains that lie on the borders of my country," said Pippin. "But only evil wights dwell there now, and I will not willingly tell more of them." "I see that strange tales are woven about you," said Denethor. "And once again it is shown that looks may belie the man or the halfling. I accept your service, for you are not daunted by words, and you have courteous speech, strange though the sound of it may be to us in the south. And we shall have need of all folk of courtesy, be they great or small, in the days to come. Swear to me now." "Take the hilt," said Gandalf, "and speak after the Lord if you are resolved on this." "I am," said Pippin. The old man laid the sword along his lap, and Pippin put his hand on the hilt, and slowly said after Denethor, "Here do I swear fealty and service to Gondor, and to the Lord and Steward of the realm, to speak and to be silent, and to do and to let be, to come and to go, in need or plenty, in peace or war, in living or dying, from this hour henceforth, until my Lord release me, or death take me, or the world's end. So say I, Peregrine, son of Paladin, of the Shire of the Halflings." "And so this do I hear, Denethor, son of Icthelion, Lord of Gondor, Steward of the High King, and I will not forget it, nor fail to reward that which is given. Fealty with love, valour with honour, oath-breaking with vengeance." Then Pippin received back his sword, and put it in its sheath. "And now," said Denethor, "my first command to you, speak and be not silent. Tell me your full tale, and see that you recall all you can of Boromir my son. Sit now and begin." As he spoke, he struck a small silver gong that stood near his footstool, and at once servants came forward. Pippin saw then that they had been standing in alcoves on either side of the door, unseen as he and Gandalf entered. "Bring wine and food and seats for the guests," said Denethor, "and see that none trouble us for 1 hour." "It is all I have to spare, for there is much else to heed." Oh, I'm sorry, this is actually not Gandalf speaking. "It is all that I have to spare, for there is much else to heed," he said to Gandalf. "Much of more import, as it may seem, and yet to me less pressing. But maybe we can speak again at the end of day." "And earlier it is to be hoped," said Gandalf, "for I have not ridden hither from Isengard 150 leagues, with the speed of wind, only to bring you one small warrior, however courteous. Is it not here that Theoden has fought a great battle, and that Isengard is overthrown, and that I have broken the staff of Saruman? It is much to me. But I know already sufficient of these deeds for my own counsel against the menace of the East." He turned his dark eyes on Gandalf, and now Pippin saw a likeness between the two, and he felt the strain between them, almost as if he saw a line of smouldering fire drawn from eye to eye that might suddenly burst into flame. Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did, more kingly, beautiful, and powerful, and older. Yet by a sense other than his sight, Pippin perceived that Gandalf had the greater power and the deeper wisdom, and a majesty that was veiled, and he was older, far older. How much older, he wondered, and then he thought how odd it was that he had never even thought about it before. Treebeard had said something about wizards, but even then he had not thought of Gandalf as one of them. What was Gandalf? In what far time and place did he come into the world, and when would he leave it? And then his musings broke off, and he saw that Denethor and Gandalf still looked each other in the eye, as if reading the other's mind. But it was Denethor who first withdrew his gaze. "Yea," he said, "for though the stones be lost, they say, still the lords of Gondor have keener sight than lesser men, and many messages come to them. But sit now." Then men came bearing a chair and a low stool, and one brought a salver with silver flagon and cups and white cakes. Pippin sat down, but he could not take his eyes from the old lord. Was it so, or had he only imagined it, that as he spoke of the stones a sudden gleam of his eye had glanced upon Pippin's face? "Now tell me your tale, my liege," said Denethor, half kindly, half mockingly. "For the words of one whom my son so befriended will be welcome indeed." Pippin never forgot that hour in the great hall under the piercing eye of the Lord of Gondor, stabbed ever and anon by his shrewd questions, and all the while conscious of Gandalf at his side, watching and listening, and, so Pippin felt, holding in check a rising wrath and impatience. When the hour was over and Denethor again rang the gong, Pippin felt worn out. "It cannot be more than 9 o'clock," he thought. "I could now eat 3 breakfasts on end." "Lead the Lord Mithrandir to the housing prepared for him," said Denethor, "and his companion may lodge with him for the present if he will. But be it known that I have now sworn him to my service, and he shall be known of Peregrine son of Paladin, and taught the lesser passwords. Send word to the captains that they shall wait on me here, as soon as they may be after the 3rd hour has rung. And you, my lord Mithrandir, shall come too, as you when and will. None shall hinder your coming to me at any time, save only in my brief hours of sleep. Let your wrath and an old man's folly run off, and then return to my comfort." "Folly," said Gandalf. "Nay, my lord. When you are adopted, you will die. You can use even your grief as a cloak. Do you think I do not understand your purpose in questioning me for an hour, one who knows the least, while I sit by?" "If you understand it, then be content," returned Denethor. "Pride would be folly that disdained help and counsel at need, but you deal out such gifts according to your own designs. Yet the Lord of Gondor is not to be made the tool of other men's purposes, however worthy. And to him there is no purpose higher in the world as it now stands in the good of Gondor. And the rule of Gondor, my lord, is mine and no other man's, unless the king should come again." Oh, yes, that's absolutely true, Dro. And Pippin caught him there. He caught that little gleam in his eye when he says, "Oh, the stones are lost," And Pippin caught that. Now, and he looked at him like, Now, what's really interesting here is we start to see the hatred here that he has for Gandalf. And Gandalf himself, I don't think he hates Denethor, but he's a bit tired of him. He's been dealing with this guy for a while, He's a bit tired of him. And here he is. He's interrogating Pippin for an hour while Gandalf is there, because he knows that Gandalf could easily dodge questions if he wished to. But what's really interesting here is all the little things that Denethor says. He's a very, very smart man. All the little things that he says that hints to what he really knows, And really the line here that's important is, "Yet the Lord of Gondor is not to be made the tool of other men's purposes, however worthy. And to him there is no purpose higher in the world as it now stands than the good of Gondor, and the rule of Gondor, my lord, is mine and no other man's, unless the king should come again." Now, he knows about Aragorn, because he's met Aragorn in the past. Aragorn came to Gondor in the past. He called himself Thorongil, which is the Eagle of the Star. And we're going to talk about that a lot when we get to the appendix and we read that story. But what's really interesting is that Denethor was pretty young when this happened. This was during the days of Stuart Icthelion. And there's a deep jealousy that Denethor has for Aragorn, because his father favored Aragorn, and he felt that hey, wait a minute, this guy is in the pocket of Mithrandir. He's going to try to usurp us. He believes that Gandalf is putting forward Aragorn as a candidate to become the king, and that he's going to control him as a puppet, and that it's going to be basically Gandalf that runs Gondor, and that Gandalf is sort of slowly taking over the world in that sense. And this is all going to come to a head in later on, and we're going to get one of my very favorite speeches that Gandalf says, but that's later. But I just wanted to show how much foreshadowing there is and how much you can see. And, even like what Joe said here, somebody's telling a fib. Pippin caught that, and he's making all these like sly references to the past and to the present as well. "Unless the king should come again," said Gandalf. "Well, my Lord Steward, it is your task to keep some kingdom still against that event, which few now look to see. In that task you shall have all the aid that you are pleased to ask for, but I will say this, the rule of no realm is mine, neither of Gondor, or any other great or small. But all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. And for my part I shall not wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish. If anything passes through this night that can still grow fair or bear fruit and flower again in days to come. For I am also a steward. Did you not know?" And with that he turned and strode from the hall with Pippin running at his side. I mean, there's a really great moment here where he's basically dropping the mic on him. Because, as I mentioned, Denethor is saying all these sort of like little coded messages and these little barbs and these little references. And Gandalf's like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I'm not all about that. You're a steward of Gondor? Fantastic. I'm a steward of Middle-earth. And that means that I know that I'm not in charge of Middle-earth, but I'm taking care of it. And I'm going to continue doing my job and not worrying about all this provincial nonsense that you're caught up in. Gandalf did not look at Pippin or speak a word to him as they went. Their guide brought them from the doors of the hall and then led them across the court of the fountain into a lane between tall buildings of stone. After several turns they came to a house close to the wall of the citadel upon the north side, not far from the shoulder that linked the hill with the mountain. Within, upon the first floor, above the street, up a wide carven stair, he showed them to a fair room, light and airy, with goodly hangings of dull gold sheen unfigured. It was sparsely furnished, having but a small table, 2 chairs, and a bench. But at either side there were curtained alcoves and well-clad beds within the vessels and basins for washing. There were 3 high, narrow windows that looked northward over the great curve of Anduin, still shrouded in mists, toward the Emyn Muil and Rauros far away. Pippin had to climb on the bench to look over the deep stone sill. "Are you angry with me, Gandalf?" he said, as their guide went out and closed the door. "I did the best I could." "You did indeed," said Gandalf, laughing suddenly, and he came and stood beside Pippin, putting his arm around the hobbit's shoulders and gazing out of the window. Pippin glanced at some wonder at the face now close beside his own, for the sound of that laugh had been gay and merry. Yet in the wizard's face he saw at first only lines of care and sorrow, though as he looked more intently he perceived that under all there was a great joy, a fountain of mirth enough to set a kingdom laughing were it to gush forth. "Indeed you did your best," said the wizard. "And I hope that it may be long before you find yourself in such a tight corner again, between 2 such terrible old men. Still, the Lord of Gondor learned more from you than you may have guessed, Pippin. You could not hide the fact that Boromir did not lead the company from Moria, and that there was one among you of high honor who was coming to Minas Tirith, and that he had a famous sword. Men think much about the stories of old days in Gondor, and Denethor has given long thought to the rhyme and to the words Isildur's bane, since Boromir went away. He is not as other men of his time, Pippin, and whatever be his descent from father to son, by some chance the blood of Westernesse runs nearly true in him, as it does in his other son, Faramir, and yet he did not in Boromir, whom he loved best, He has long sight. He can perceive, if he bends his will thither, much of which is passing in the minds of men, even of those that dwell far off. It is difficult to deceive him and dangerous to try. So let's talk about one of the descriptions here of Denethor that Gandalf said. He has long sight. So how do we translate that into Elvish? Long sight. How would you say long sight in Sindarin? Does anybody know? Yeah, that quote was actually what yeah, that was a discussion between Boromir and Denethor, where he was like, hey, you know, how long do we have to wait to be kings? And Denethor says, it's never long enough. Though Legolas is Greenleaf, Matt is actually well, he spelled it more, but Palantir means far-sighted, long-sighted. So, I mean, like I said, if you know the linguistics of it, the hints are all there, you know? And he's saying, you know, hey, this guy sees far. And how do you say that? Palantir, to see far. Denethor has so much power in the correct bloodlines and then decides to be petty. Theoden has far less and manages to do something with it. I mean, he's petty to a certain degree, but really what he is, Kits, is he is paranoid. He is deeply paranoid. He doesn't want Aragorn to be the king. Not because he wants to remain in charge, but because he thinks Aragorn has other interests. He thinks that Aragorn is Gandalf's puppet. Gandalf's not somebody from Gondor. He's deeply paranoid. And it was shortly after Thorongil, who was actually Aragorn, left Gondor and disappeared, that he started using the Palantir. And that's when he started becoming known as this person who was farsighted. He was already perceptive enough to make a connection between this Thorongil fellow and Mithrandir, but now he becomes almost like somebody who could read minds, somebody who knows all sorts of secrets, almost a little bit like Saruman, not nearly as dark as Saruman, not anywhere on that level, but somebody who just can uncover secrets. And nobody really knows why. I mean, even Gandalf doesn't know until he actually sees the Palantir. But Gandalf is almost sort of like almost getting there. He's like almost reaching it, like almost like on an unconscious level. He's saying this guy is far seeing. And how do you say that in Elvish? Palantir. He's almost there. He's almost got it figured out. Except that Gandalf, he has other problems himself right now. He has to worry about a lot of other things. He's not just worried about what's going on in the steward's mind, but he's close. He's close. The fact that he used that phrase. All right, let's continue here. Theoden easily overcomes Saruman's influence. Oh, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Remember what Saruman, or I should say what Grima the Wormtongue did to Theoden was to play upon his insecurities, to play upon the fact that he was very old. He's older even than Denethor. And he's from a line that's not going to live as long as Denethor is going to live. Denethor is about 60 years old right now, and he's Númenorian. Like his son Faramir lives to about 120 years old, so 60 is no big deal. It's middle-aged, right? And the reason that he's constantly referred to as an old man is because after his wife died, he aged a lot. All of a sudden, he aged prematurely. But Theoden is different. You got to remember, Theoden was fully convinced that he was weak, that he was senile, that he was useless, and he went through the death of his son, just like Denethor went through the death of his son, and he doesn't have a second son. He has a nephew. He has a niece. So he needed more than a little nudge from Gandalf. He needed the poison element to be removed. He needed Grima to be exposed and removed from there. And even then, he said to Gandalf, I feel weak. And Gandalf told him, your hands would remember your strength if they held your sword. So it wasn't easy. It was miraculous, but it wasn't easy. He didn't just shake it off all at once, like kind of like what happened in the movie. But yeah, no, I mean, there's no doubt. If you were asking me who's the better leader, I'm going to say Theoden's the better leader any day, right? Denethor, like I said, the movies kind of like poison people's perception of Denethor. They think of him as like this bad guy. He's not a bad guy. He's this very sort of paranoid person, and some would even argue that somebody in a situation should be a little bit paranoid. But he's a very paranoid person who is really all about looking out for his country, but he made a really bad mistake in messing with the Palantir, because now Sauron has driven him almost to the brink of madness. He's close, and he's gonna get there, as we know. But yeah, he's been convinced that he's fighting a losing war. His only son, has, that is like him, that is like him in temperament, if not in well, not even really. Like Boromir's not like him, but his son died, and his other son, his only son that's left, is friends with Gandalf. So yeah, he's misguided. That's a perfect way of putting it, Kits. He's misguided, and unfortunately, like the guy who could guide him is right in front of him, is Gandalf, but he sees Gandalf the way that Theoden saw Gandalf up until very recently. Gandalf Stormcrow, bearer of bad news, ill tidings. Every time this guy shows up, it's, oh no, what happened now? You know what I mean? And that could be very tiresome for Gandalf, by the way, because everywhere Gandalf goes, they're like, oh my God, this guy, what happened now? A theme of evil ignoring the little guy and then losing because of it. Absolutely. The Palantir poisoned Denethor. The ring poisoned Boromir. Fatal poisonings both. Yeah, I mean, I would say that Sauron poisoned Denethor. You have to remember that the Palantir are tools. They're not evil. They're tools. And Aragorn used the Palantir with no issues, And it's not because Aragorn's that much better than Denethor. It's just because he was better at facing Sauron, basically. Hashtag this guy, absolutely. So you got to remember, they're just tools. Fëanor made these things, so you have to kind of think of it like, all right, yeah, the guy that made them is kind of a maniac, but he made a lot of really great things. Everybody's sort of like still using his alphabet, So there's that. He was really important in developing languages as a Pendralothrim, but yeah. Oh no, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, if you're a king or a lord in some place, not an elf, right, a mortal man in some place in Middle Earth, and then all of a sudden Gandalf shows up, and I have news, and you're just like, it's bad, right? That's why they started calling him Stormcrow, You should think it was Tolkien's personal experience as the upper class during the war. That's not, that's not too far off, though. That's not too far off. But that's less, it doesn't come through with Denethor. It comes through with Saruman more than Denethor. Because Saruman is the one who thinks his doo-doo smells like roses and that everybody should listen to him because he's the one in charge and everything. You know what I mean? Denethor is, we don't see him as a man of the people, but he is. It's so easy to define him by the last few hours of his life because that's when we get to know him. But there was a lot leading up to that was really good. And that's important, you know what I mean? And it's the same for Boromir. You know what I mean? A lot of people, they think of Boromir as the guy who tried to take the ring from Frodo. They don't think of him as the guy that briefly stopped a Balrog in his tracks and lived to tell the tale, you know? They don't think of him as the one who saved Merry and Pippin. They think of him as the one that took the ring, or tried to take the ring from Frodo, you know what I mean? So, yeah. But if you want to see like that commentary, because that commentary does come through, Kits, because it happened when Tolkien entered the service. He said all the officers were they said they were barely human, but the enlisted men, he was like, these guys are great. These are my people, you know. But and Tolkien was an officer, by the way, but he felt that all the other officers were trash, that they barely were human. And we see it in like you know what? Actually, we see it in the Shire more than anything. Sam is based on the sort of like the lowly soldier who's just a really, really good guy, you know, the Batman, so to speak. Whereas then you have these people like Lotho and Ted Sandyman, you know, that they just relish in ordering people around. And they don't really, there's no sauce there, you know what I mean? Nobody really likes them, but they just sort of put up with them. Especially with Lotho, we'll learn a lot about him later. Lotho's been such a minor character at this point, but obviously when we get to book 6, we're gonna learn a lot about him. But anyway, let's continue. I think we're only going to get through this chapter today, which is fine. But sometimes that happens. I mean, there were a few chapters, especially in the Fellowship of the Ring, that took up a whole stream. Flight to the Ford and the Council of Elrond, obviously, were streams unto themselves. Minas Tirith here absolutely would be. It's a pretty long chapter and there's a lot to talk about. Even Book Boromir did have quite a few problem moments along the way. Aragorn basically called him a liar to his face. Do you not know, or do you choose to forget about the... Yeah, well, see, if I could describe Boromir in one word, it would be ignorant. That doesn't make him a bad person, right? But he is ignorant. There is no doubt about it. And he's really, the other word would be stubborn. He's very stubborn. And Gandalf said it just a few pages ago. He said that, you know, well, why didn't Faramir go? Because Boromir said that he was going to go and nobody could change his mind about anything, you know? But anyway, we still have a few pages here to get through, so let's get back to it. I really have enjoyed today, and I've enjoyed all the discussions and everything, but we do have to try to finish the chapter. So let's continue here. Let's see. Remember that. For now you are sworn to his service. I do not know what put it into your head or your heart to do that, but it was well done. I did not hinder it, for generous deeds should not be checked by cold counsel. It touched his heart as well, may I say it, as pleasing his humour. And at least you are free now to move about as you will in Minas Tirith, when you are not on duty. For there is another side to it. You are at his command, and he will not forget. Be very still. He fell silent and sighed. Well, no need to brood on what tomorrow may bring. For one thing, tomorrow will be certain to bring worse than today, for many days to come. And there is nothing more than I could do to help it. The board is set and the pieces are moving. One piece that I greatly desire to find is Faramir, now the heir of Denethor. I do not think that he is in the city, but I have had no time to gather news. I must go, Pippin. I must go to the Lord's council and learn what I can, but the enemy has the move, and he is about to open his full game, and pawns are likely to see as much of it as any peregrine son of Paladin, soldier of Gondor. Sharpen your blade. Gandalf went to the door, and there he turned. I am in haste, Pippin, he said. Do me a favour when you go out. Even before you rest, if you are not too weary, go and find Shadowfax and see how he is housed. These people are kindly to beasts, for they are a good and wise folk, but they have less skill with horses than some. Just to pause briefly there, somebody once asked me on Quora, this was a really long time ago when I first sort of started this endeavor on Quora, does chess exist in Middle-earth? And I said, well, you know, we don't get explicit mentions of the game of chess, but we get allusions to it, and it's all concentrated right there in that paragraph. He mentions the board, the pieces, he even says pawns. So there you go. Peregrine means pilgrim or wanderer. So Pippin and Gandalf share a meaning within their names. Mithrandir is, yeah, Great Pilgrim, absolutely. Gandalf actually means elf with a wand, which is a little confusing because he's not an elf, but that's more elf in the terms of the Norse elf, meaning a spirit, and they were usually depicted as dwarves. As a matter of fact, the name in The Hobbit, Gandalf, originally belonged to one of the dwarves, and the wizard was named Bladderthin, which is some sort of like very obscure reference to Beleriand. But he changed it around where he gave the name Gandalf to the wizard, and then the dwarf that was called Gandalf became Thorin. Because all of the names, Gandalf was a name that actually comes from the Edda, the Voluspa, and it was the name of one of the many dwarves, which are sort of like spirits, and these sort of spirits in Norse mythology and Norse poetry are often referred to as elves. So Gand is very old English. It's Anglo-Saxon. It means cane or wand. So Gandalf is elf with a wand, or spirit with a wand. Because he always saw Gandalf as being a spirit, even before the idea of the Maiar came to be. See, the Valar were there in the beginning. They weren't called the Valar; they were called the gods. But the idea, though, there was that there were spirits in the world, and Gandalf was one of them. And we see a little bit of like Pippin earlier, wondering, well, what exactly is Gandalf? What is he? How long has he been around? How long is he going to be around? But yeah, Mithrandir is Grey Pilgrim. So you do see that there. As a matter of fact, the way that they gloss pilgrim from that is somebody who walks the land with a purpose, and it's actually pretty similar to Telcontar, which is to go forth, right? Which is Telcontar is what Aragorn winds up calling his house, the House of Telcontar, when he becomes the king. So his full kingly title, Aragorn II Elisar Telcontar. And Telcontar is the closest thing in Elvish that we could say is Strider, actually. So you have a lot of this sort of like walking forward, carrying across, bearing news, a pilgrim. Peregrine does mean pilgrim. You're right about that. Hobbit names didn't always match who they were, but sometimes they did. Sometimes it was a little on the nose, like Gerontius Took, who was the oldest lived Hobbit until Bilbo comes along at 130 years old. And it's like, so you're telling me that Gerontius's parents had this baby boy and they named him Old Man? It's sort of crazy to think of it that way, right? And I don't know if you saw the TV show, but they actually got a little bit into the linguistics of Gandalf, where it was derived from Grand Elf, but in an earlier point in the story, they had referred to the staff that he was looking for as a Gond. So I was like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. It's a little weird because the name should be given to him by men, not by hobbits, but I understand where you're going, But yeah, no, you're right. And a lot of times, people, because of a few moments in the book and a lot of moments in the film, they think that Gandalf doesn't like Pippin. Right? No. Gandalf really likes Pippin. I think that's his favorite of the four hobbits is Pippin. I've said it many times. They have a special relationship, and we see it here where, they're both looking out of Minas Tirith, and they're looking out to the water and all this beautiful countryside, and there are a lot of thoughts going through their minds. And Pippin is thinking, man, we just ran out of there, and he's not saying anything to me. He didn't look at me or anything. He's like, are you mad at me? And he puts his arm around him like, no, man, you're good. You're real good, you know? Pippin and Gandalf, great duo. Underrated duo, I would say. All right, we got a few pages left. Let's continue. With that, Gandalf went out, and as he did so, there came the note of a clear, sweet bell ringing in a tower of the citadel. 3 strokes it rang like silver in the air, and ceased, the 3rd hour from the rising of the sun. After a minute, Pippin went to the door and down the stair and looked about the street. The sun was now shining warm and bright, and the towers and the tall houses cast long, clear-cut shadows westward. High in the blue air, Mount Mindolluin lifted its white helm and snowy cloak. Armed men went to and fro in the ways of the city, as if going to the striking of the hour to changes of post and duty. 9 o'clock, as we'd call it in the Shire, said Pippin aloud to himself. Just the time for a nice breakfast by the open window in a spring sunshine. And how should I like breakfast? Do these people ever have it, or is it over? And when do they have dinner? And where? Presently he noticed a man clad in black and white coming along the narrow street from the centre of the citadel toward him. Pippin felt lonely and made up his mind to speak as the man passed, but he had no need. The man came straight up to him. "You are Peregrine the Halfling," he said. "I am told that you have been sworn to the service of the lord of the city. Welcome." He held out his hand, and Pippin took it. "I am named Beregond, son of Baranor. I have no duty this morning, and I have been sent to teach you the passwords and to tell you of some of the many things that no doubt you will wish to know. And for my part, I would learn of you also, for never before have we seen a halfling in this land, and though we have heard rumour of them, little is said of them in any tale that we know. Moreover, you are a friend of Mithrandir. Do you know him well?" "Well," said Pippin, "I have known of him all my short life, as you might say, and lately I have travelled far with him, but there is much to read in that book, and I cannot claim to have seen more than a page or 2. Yet perhaps I know him as well as any but a few. Aragorn was the only one of our company, I think, who really knew him." "Aragorn," said Beregond. "Who was he?" "Oh," stammered Pippin, "he was a man who went about with us. I think he's in Rohan now." "You have been to Rohan, I hear. There is much that I would ask you of that land also, for we put much of what little hope we have in its people. But I am forgetting my errand, which is first to answer what you would ask. What would you know, Master Peregrine?" Well," said Pippin, "if I may venture to say so, rather burning question in my mind at present is, well, what about breakfast and all that? I mean, what about the meal times, if you understand me, and where is the dining room, if there is one, and the inns? I looked, but never a one could I see as we rode up, though I had been borne up by the hope of a draught of ale as soon as we came to the homes of wise and courtly men." Beregond looked at him gravely. "An old campaigner, I see," he said. "They say that men who go warring afield look ever to the next hope of food and of drink, though I am not a travelled man myself. Then you have not yet eaten today?" "Well, yes, to speak in courtesy, yes," said Pippin, "but no more than a cup of wine and a white cake or 2 by the kindness of your lord. But he raked me for it within an hour of questions, and that is hungry work." Beregond laughed. "At the small table men may do the greater deeds, we say. But you have broken your fast, as well as any man in the citadel, and with greater honour. This is a fortress and a tower of God, and is now in posture of war. We rise ere the sun, and take a morsel in the grey light, and go to our duties in the opening hour. But do not despair." He laughed again, seeing the dismay in Pippin's face. "Those who have had heavy duty take somewhat to refresh their strength in the mid-morning. Then there is the nuncheon, at noon or after as our duties follow, and men gather for the day meal, such as mirth as there still may be, for about the hour of sunset." So, by the way, what he's saying is they do know about second breakfast. Why do people have names similar to their fathers? Well, you could ask that in real life. I mean, I had the same name as my father. You know what I mean? My father was John also. I mean, a lot of times it's really just that. It's, we see it with names like Feanor, actually. You know, that was a name that his mother called him, but his father called him Curafinwe. Curafinwe, son of Finwë. You know, and then you think, what does Curafinwe mean? Wisdom of Finwë. So I think that, a lot of people, they think of their children as extensions of themselves, which is not the greatest look, but that is why I think people have very similar names, and you see it, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Hurin, son of Turin, son of Hurin. Absolutely, yeah. It's a feature in all the cultures. Oin, son of Gloin. But like I said, it's not a Hobbit thing or a man thing or an elf thing. It's universal. I think that a lot of people, they think that their children are a part of themselves and should be named thusly. And we see it in a lot of family traditions. And as a matter of fact, if you look at just the hobbits, for example, you see the Tooks all have these very Romanesque sounding names like Peregrine and Isengrim and Bandabras, And then you look at the Bagginses, and it's all this, Bingo and Baffo and Bilbo and Frodo. It's all these sort of like silly, sort of like rural English names, and then if you look at the Brandy Bucks, we get these sort of Welsh sounding things like Meriaduc, so there's a lot of there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Mike Johnson is John's son originally, like a name like Jameson, James's son. So it's really, really common for there to be these sort of traditions, and you see it especially if you ever look at Aragorn's lineage. There's so many Ara names in his family because they were saying, "Well, we're going to name you in a traditional sort of way." Let's move on here. But yes, they do know of second breakfast in Gondor. Come, we will walk a little, and then go find us some refreshment, and eat and drink on the battlement, and survey the fair morning. One moment, said Pippin, blushing. Greed, or hunger by your courtesy, put it out of my mind, but Gandalf, Mithrandir as you call him, asked me to see to his horse, Shadowfax, a great steed of Rohan, and the apple of the king's eye, I am told, though he was given him to Mithrandir for his services. I think the new master loves the beast better than he loves many men, and if his good will is of any value to the city, he will treat Shadowfax with honour, with greater kindness than you have treated this hobbit, if it is possible. Hobbit, said Baragon. That is what we call ourselves, said Pippin. I am glad to learn it, said Baragon, for now I may say that strange accents do not mar fair speech, and hobbits are a fair-spoken folk. But come, you shall make me acquainted with this good horse. I love beasts, and we see them seldom in the stony city, for my people come from the mountain vales, and before that from Ithilien. But fear not, the visit shall be short, a mere call of courtesy, and we will go thence for the butteries. Hey, no problem. That is sort of what I'm here for, is answering random questions, right? Sam's relatives in the rope business are the ropers from Typhil. Well, I like to make a joke too about the Gamgees. They have terrible, terrible names. Sam bucked the trend. He named all of his male children after people that he knew. So there's a Frodo, there's a Bilbo, there's a for example, there's a bunch of those, right? And all of his daughters, the Hobbit women always have such nice names. They're always named after plants and flowers and such, right? But before that, like if you think, what does Samwise mean? It means half-foot. And then if you look at like his father, Hamfast, and which is like he's son of Ham, So and then you look at like Sam has a bunch of brothers. They all have ridiculous names, like the Gamgees are all just like Ham this, Fast that, Absolutely, and I would love to do audiobooks at some point, but I can't do that for copyright reasons. So we have to have breaks. We have to have analyses. We have to discuss things. Absolutely 100% mandatory to do that. Pippin found that Shadowfax had been well housed and tended, for in the sixth circle outside the walls of the citadel there were some fair stables where a few swift horses were kept, hard by the lodgings of the errand riders of the Lord, messengers who were always ready to go at the urgent command of Denethor or of his chief captains. But now all the horses and the riders were out and away. Shadowfax whinnied as Pippin entered the stable and turned his head. "Good morning," said Pippin. "Gandalf will come as soon as he may. He is busy, but he sends his greetings. And I am to see that all's well with you, and you resting, I hope, after your long labours." Shadowfax tossed his head and stamped, but he allowed Baragon to handle his head gently and stroke his great flanks. "He looks as if he was spoiling for a race, and not newly come from a great journey," said Baragon. "How strong and proud he is! Where is his harness? It should be rich and fair." "None is rich and fair enough for him," said Pippin. "He will have none. If he will consent to bear you, he does, and if not, well, no bit, bridle, whip, or thong will tame him. Farewell, Shadowfax, have patience, battle is coming." Shadowfax lifted up his head and neighed, so that the stable shook, and they covered their ears. Then they took to their leave, seeing that the manger was well filled. And by the way, let me let me go to this again, actually. So Shadowfax, he is of a race of... I'm going to go into this whole thing about names being very, very literal. Shadowfax is from a race of horses, very noble horses, called Maris. And if you think about it, Maris, mare, horse. Shadowfax took the hobbit in his mouth and swallowed him. That would be an interesting meal for a horse. And if we trace the lineage of the Maris way back to the first age, we get to the very first one, which was Oroma's horse himself, which was, and hi there, buttons bloomers, named Nehar. Now, Nehar is translated from Valoran. It's a much longer name in Valoran, but in Quenya, Nehar. And Oroma admitted that he called his horse Nehar after the sound that he makes when he wants to ride or wants to run. So he named his horse Neigh. You know what I mean? He names his horse Neigh. The race becomes mares, So sometimes this happens, and sometimes, like, I'm going to give you a really good example. The Bay of Belfalos. It was mentioned a few times in this chapter. That's where Prince Imrahil is from. What does Belfalos mean? If we break down the Elvish, Bel means shore. Falos means shore. It is the Bay of shore. And we absolutely see this in real life. We see this all the time, there is a species of bear that the Latin name of it is bear, horrible bear, because it has Arctos, which is bear, and the other Ursus, which is bear. So it's like horribilis, Arctos, Ursus, horrible bear. So we see that. Gollum was named after the sound he made when he cleared his sword. So, we see this kind of thing all the time. Even the Shire, which is a translation from the Suzat. What does that mean? It means the country. That's what it means. Sahara means desert. Really good example. Yeah. So we see this sort of thing all the time. In the way that people name things, they name their children after themselves. There's a lot of that. Doesn't the Carrick translate to the rock? It sure does. It's like when you say, "Wow, that's such a rocky rock, man. It's a double rock," Right. But yeah, that's actually really common. But like I said, sometimes, Tolkien is very good at naming things, but he also is trying to create like a living, breathing world where not everybody in that world is going to be really good at naming things. And that's how we get things like Bay of Belfalos or Samwise or Nehar, of the Maris. Shadowfax lifted up his head and neighed so that the stable shook, and they covered their ears. Then they took their leave, seeing that the manger was well filled. "And now for our manger," said Beregond, and he led Pippin back to the citadel, and so to a door on the north side of the great tower. There they went down a long, cool stair into a wide alley lit with lamps. There were hatches in the walls at the side, and one of them was open. "This is the storehouse and buttery of my company of the gods," said Beregond. "Greetings, Targon," he called through the hatch. "It is early yet, but here is a newcomer that the Lord has taken into his service. He has ridden long and far with a tight belt, and he has sore labor this morning, and he is hungry. Give us what you have." They got their bread and butter and cheese and apples, the last of the winter store, wrinkled but sound and sweet, and a leather flagon of new-drawn ale and wooden platters and cups. They put all into a wicker basket and climbed back into the sun, and Beregond brought Pippin to a place at the east end of the great outthrust battlement, where there was an embrasure in the walls, with a stone seat beneath the sill. From there they could look out into the morning over the world. They ate and drank, and they talked now of Gondor and its ways and customs, now of the Shire and the strange countries that Pippin had seen. And ever as they talked, Beregond was still more amazed, and looked with greater wonder at the hobbit, swinging his short legs as he sat on the seat, or standing tiptoe upon it to peer over the sill at the lands below. "I will not hide from you, Master Peregrine," said Beregond, "that to us you look almost as one of our children, a lad of 9 summers or so, and yet you have endured perils and seen marvels that few of our grey beards could boast of. I thought it was the whim of our Lord to take him a noble page after the manner of the kings of old, they say, but I see that it is not so, and you must pardon my foolishness." "I do," said Pippin. "Though you are not far wrong, I am still little more than a boy in the reckoning of my own people, and it will be 4 years before I come of age, as we say in the Shire. But do not bother about me. Come and look, and tell me what I can see." The sun was now climbing, and the mists in the vale below had been drawn up. The last of them were floating away just overhead as wisps of white cloud borne on the stiffening breeze from the east, that was now flapping and tugging the flags and white standards of the citadel. Away down in the valley bottom, 5 leagues or so, as the eye leaps, the great river could now be seen, grey and glittering, coming out in the northwest and bending in a mighty sweep south and west again, till it was lost to view in a haze and shimmer far beyond which lay the sea 50 leagues away. Pippin could see all the Pelennor laid out before him, dotted into the distance, with farmsteads and little walls, barns and byres, but nowhere could he see any kine or other beasts. Many roads and tracks crossed the green fields, and there was much coming and going, wains moving in lines toward the great gate and others passing out. Now and again a horseman would ride up and leap from the saddle and hasten into the city, but most of the traffic went out along the chief highway, and that turned south, and then, bending swifter than the river, skirted the halls and passed soon from sight. It was wide and well paved, and along its eastern edge ran a broad green riding track, and beyond that a wall. On the ride horsemen galloped to and fro, but all the streets seemed to be choked with great covered wains going south. But soon Pippin saw that all was in fact well ordered. The wains were moving in 3 lines, one swifter drawn by horses, another slower, great wagons, with fair housings of many colours drawn by oxen, and along the west rim of the road many smaller carts hauled by trudging men. "That is the road to the vales of Tumladen and Lasanach, and the mountain villages, and then on to Lebanon," said Beregond. "There go the last of the wains that bear away to refuge, the aged, the children, and the women that must go with them. They must all be gone from the gate and the road clear for a league before noon. That was the order. It is a sad necessity." He sighed. "Few, maybe, of now those sundered will meet again, and there will always be too few children in this city. But now there are none, save some young lads that will not depart, and many find some task to do, as my own son is one of them." They fell silent for a while. Pippin gazed anxiously eastward, as if at any moment he might see thousands of orcs pouring over the field. "What can I see there?" he asked, pointing down to the middle of the great curve of the Anduin. "Is that another city? What is it?" "It was a city," said Beregond, "the chief city of Gondor, of which this was only a fortress. But that is the ruin of Osgiliath on either side of the Anduin, which our enemies took and burned long ago. Yet we won it back in the days of the youth of Denethor, not to dwell in, but to hold as an outpost and to rebuild the bridge for the passing of our arms. And then came the fell riders out of Minas Morgul." "The Black Riders," said Pippin, opening his eyes, and they were wide and dark with an old fear reawakened. What animals does Tolkien not mention that you think he would? Oh, that's an interesting question. I like that question. I think that he mentions a lot of animals, though. That's the thing. I'm trying to think of, like, I mean, there's even elephants in the story, so let me think about this for a moment. What is an animal that you'd think Tolkien would have mentioned, but he didn't? I mean, obviously, yeah, there's no pandas, there's no kangaroos, you know. I think one animal that never gets mentioned is lizards. Because we have dragons, right? But we don't have lizards, as far as we know. There probably are, but it's interesting that you never hear sort of like a description of a dragon as being like sort of like a big lizard or anything like that. That's probably where I would go with that. But he mentions a lot of animals, a giraffe. I mean, like you have to think of the part of the world that they're in. Right now, Pippin's in what essentially amounts to Italy. There wouldn't be giraffes there. There would be giraffes to the south in Harad. There's elephants because they use them for war, and then it's an invading force, That's why you don't see the basilisk in Tolkien. Well, basilisk is almost more like a bird creature, but yeah, like a cockatrice sort of thing. Sometimes it gets depicted as reptilian, but I think that's incorrect. All right, let's continue here. Yes, they were black, said Baragon, and I see that you know something of them, though you have not spoken of them in any of your tales. I know of them, said Pippin softly. But I will not speak of them now, so near, so near. Ah, I got it. Sheep. He doesn't talk about sheep, does he? Sheeps. Especially, I'm thinking Italy. Oh, the sheep in Italy. Sheep are really important in Italy, right? Gondor should have sheep. We don't hear about it. I mean, I guess they mentioned wool, but they don't mention sheep specifically, right? Jackal, that's a good one. Yeah. I mean, we get a lot of like canids, not necessarily unicorns. Well, for any given definition of animal, that would be a rhinoceros, really, which they probably have in Harad. Let's try that again. I know of them, said Pippin softly, but I will not speak of them now, so near, so near. He broke off and lifted his eyes above the river, and it seemed to him that all he could see was a vast and threatening shadow. Perhaps it was mountains looming on the verge of sight, their jagged edges softened by well-nigh 20 leagues of misty air. Perhaps it was but a cloud wall, and beyond that again yet a deeper gloom. But even as he looked, it seemed to his eyes that the gloom was growing and gathering very slowly, rising to smother the regions of the sun. So near to Mordor, said Baragon quietly. Yes, there it lies. We seldom name it, but we have dwelt ever in sight of that shadow. Sometimes it seems fainter and more distant, sometimes nearer and darker. It is growing and darkening now, and therefore our fear and disquiet grow too. And the fell riders, less than a year ago, they won back the crossings, and many of our best men were slain. Boromir it was that drove the enemy out at last back from this western shore, and we hold still the near half of Osgiliath for a little while. But we await now a new onslaught there, maybe the chief onslaught of the war that comes. When? Said Pippin. Have you a guess? For I saw the beacons last night in the errand riders, and Gandalf said it was a sign that war had begun. He seemed in a desperate hurry, but now everything seems to have slowed up again. Only because everything is now ready, said Baragon. It is but the deep breath before the plunge. But why were the beacons lit last night? It is over late to send aid when you are already besieged, answered Baragon. But I do not know the counsel of the Lord and his captains. They have many ways of gathering news, and the Lord Denethor is unlike any other man. He sees far. There's that phrase again. He sees far. Palantir. Some say that he sits alone in his high chamber in the tower at night and bends his thought this way and that. He can read somewhat of the future, and that he will at times search even the minds of the enemy, wrestling with him. And so it is that he is old, worn before his time. But however that may be, my Lord Faramir is abroad, beyond the river on some perilous errand, and he may have sent tidings. But if you would know what I think set the beacons ablaze, it was the news that came yestereve out of Lebanon. There is a great fleet drawing near to the mouths of Anduin, manned by the corsairs of Umbar in the south. They have long ceased to fear the might of Gondor, and they have allied themselves with the enemy, and now make a heavy stroke in his cause, for this attack will draw off men of the help that we look to have from Lebanon and Belfalas, where folk are hardy and numerous. All the more do our thoughts go north to Rohan, and the more glad we are for these tidings of victory that you bring. And yet... He paused and stood up and looked round, north, east, and south. The doings at Isengard should warn us that we are caught now in a great net and strategy. There is no longer a bickering at the fords, raiding from Ithilien and from Anorian, ambushing and pillaging. There is a great war long planned, and we are but one piece in it, whatever pride may be. Things move off in the far east beyond the inland sea, it is reported, and north in Mirkwood and beyond, and south in Harad. And now all realms shall be put to the test to stand or fall under the shadow. Yet, Master Peregrine, we have this honour, ever we bear the brunt of the chief hatred of the Dark Lord, for that hatred comes down out of the depths of time and over the deeps of the sea. Here will the hammer-stroke fall hardest, and for that reason Mithrandir came hither in such haste, for if we fall, who shall stand? And, Master Peregrine, do you see any hope that we shall stand? Pippin did not answer. He looked at the great walls and the towers and brave banners and the sun and the high sky, and then at the gathering gloom in the east, and he thought of the long fingers of that shadow, of the orcs in the woods and the mountains, the treason of Isengard, the birds of Evil Eye, and the black riders even in the lanes of the Shire, and of the winged terror, the Nazgul. He shuddered, and hope seemed to wither, and even at that moment the sun for a second faltered and was obscured, as though a dark wing had passed over it. Almost beyond hearing, he thought he caught, high and far up in the heavens, a cry, faint but heart-quelling, cruel and cold. He blenched and cowered against the wall. "What was that?" asked Baragon. "You also felt something." "Yes," muttered Pippin. "It is the sign of our fall and the shadow of our doom, a fell rider out of the air." "Yes, the shadow of our doom," said Baragon. "I fear that Minas Tirith shall fall. Night comes. The very warmth of my blood seems stolen away." Basilisk is a lizard. I mean, it's a mythological creature, but I've always... Well, you know what it is, though, Deb? Is that it is often depicted with feathers, and I think that... I mean, it's a dinosaur, really, right? A dinosaur. Many of the dinosaurs had feathers, so, but I always sort of saw it as very bird-like, almost like a cockatrice. I don't, because then I think if you get too reptilian, it becomes basically a dragon at that point, or a serpent at least, right? So I guess it is sort of like the happy medium between reptilian and avian, right? For a time they sat together with bowed heads and did not speak. Then suddenly Pippin looked up and saw the sun was still shining and the banner still streaming in the breeze. He shook himself. "It is past," he said. "No, my heart will not yet despair. Gandalf fell and has returned and is with us. We may stand, if only on one leg, or at least be left still upon our knees." "Rightly said," cried Baragon, rising and striding to and fro. "Nay, though all things must come utterly to an end in time, Gondor shall not perish yet. Not though the walls be taken by a reckless foe that will build a hill of carrion before them. There are still other fastnesses and secret ways of escape into the mountains. Hope and memory shall live still in some hidden valley where the grass is green." "All the same, I wish it was over for good or ill," said Pippin. "I am no warrior at all and dislike any thought of battle, but waiting on the edge of one that can't escape is worst of all. What a long day it seems already. I should be happier if we were not obliged to stand and watch, making no move, striking nowhere first. No stroke would have been struck in Rohan, I think, but for Gandalf." "Ah, there you lay your finger on the sore that many feel," said Baragon. "But things may change when Faramir returns. He is bold, more bold than many deem. For in these days men are slow to believe that a captain can be wise and learned in the scrolls of lore and song, as he is, and yet a man of hardihood and swift judgment in the field. But such is Faramir, less reckless and eager than Boromir, but not less resolute. Yet what indeed can he do? We cannot assault the mountains of yonder realm. Our reach is shortened, and we cannot strike till some foe comes within it. Then our hand must be heavy." He smote the hilt of his sword. Pippin looked at him, tall and proud and noble, as all the men that he had yet seen in this land, and with a glitter in his eye he thought of that battle. "Alas, my own hand feels as light as a feather," he thought. But he said nothing. "A pawn, did Gandalf say? Perhaps, but on the wrong chessboard." There, see, they do mention chess. So they talked until the sun reached its height, and suddenly the noon bells were rung, and there was a stir in the citadel, for all save the watchmen were going to their meal. "Will you come with me?" said Baragon. "You may join our mess for this day. I do not know to what company you will be assigned, or the Lord may hold you at his own command, but you will be welcome, and it will be well to meet as many men as you may, while there is yet time." "I shall be glad to come," said Pippin. "I am lonely, to tell you the truth. I left my best friend behind in Rohan, and I have had no one to talk to or jest with. Perhaps I could really join your company. Are you the captain? If so, you could take me on, or speak for me? Nay, nay, Beregond laughed. I am no captain. Neither office nor rank nor lordship have I, being but a plain man-of-arms of the 3rd Company of the Citadel. Yet, Master Peregrine, to be a man-of-arms of the guard of the Tower of Gondor is held worthy in the city, and such men have honour in the land. Then it is far beyond me, said Pippin. Take me back to our room, and if Gandalf is not there, I will go where you like, as your guest. Gandalf was not in the lodging, and had sent no message, so Pippin went with Beregond, and was made known to the men of the 3rd Company. And it seemed that Beregond got much honour from it as his guest, for Pippin was very welcome. There had already been much talk in the citadel about Mithrandir's companion, and his long closeting with the lord, and rumour declared that a prince of the halflings had come out of the north to offer allegiance to Gondor and 5,000 swords. And some said that when the riders came from Rohan, each would bring behind him a halfling warrior, small maybe but doughty. Though Pippin had regretfully to destroy this hopeful tale, he could not be rid of his new rank, only fitting, men thought, to one befriended by Boromir and honoured by the Lord Denethor. And they thanked him for coming among them, and hung on his words and stories of the Outlands, and gave him as much food and ale as he could wish. Indeed, his only trouble was to be wary, according to the counsel of Gandalf, and not to let his tongue wag freely after the manner of a hobbit among friends. At length Beregond rose. Farewell for this time, he said. I have duty now till sundown, as have all the others here, I think. But if you are lonely, as you say, maybe you would like a merry guide about the city. My son would go with you gladly. A good lad, I may say, if that pleases you. Go down to the lowest circle and ask for the old guest house in the Rath Caladine, the Lamplight Street. You will find him there with other lads that are remaining in the city. There may be things worth seeing down at the great gate ere the closing. He went out, and soon after all the others followed. The day was still fine, though it was growing hazy, and it was hot for March, even so far southwards. Pippin felt sleepy, but the lodging seemed cheerless, so he decided to go down and explore the city. He took a few morsels that he had saved to Shadowfax, and they were graciously accepted, though the horse seemed to have no lack. Then he walked on down many winding ways. I suppose Pippin is a prince of sorts. He'll be Thane of the Shire one day. I mean, his father is a Thane right now. And if we think of what a Thane is, both in terms of the Hobbit and in terms of the Norse Thaneship, it is essentially like a steward, somebody who rules in a king's absence. So, his father, Paladin, is the current Thane. So, yeah, I guess you could say, I mean, when Tolkien uses the term prince, he usually uses it as somebody who has a principality of some sorts. But, yeah, it's just about true, right? I think that the one that's closer to being a prince is probably Merry, because he'll be the master of Buckland, which is sort of a principality near the Shire. But Pippin is going to have a really high office, and you're right. He's sort of a very aristocratic fellow. Okay, let's continue here. People stared much as he passed. To his face men were gravely courteous, saluting him after the manner of Gondor, with bowed heads and hands upon the breast. But behind him he heard many calls, as those of doors cried to others within to come and see the Prince of the Halflings, the companion of Mithrandir. Many used some other tongue than the common speech, but it was not long before he learned at least what was meant by Ernil iv Ferianath, and he knew that his title had gone down before him into the city. Let's talk about that phrase. So Ernil is prince, of. Ferianath is it's sort of the very Gondor Cinderin way of saying Perianath, which is halfling. So there you go. He came at last by arched streets and many fair alleys and pavements to the lowest and widest circle, and there he was directed to the Lamplight Street, a broad way running toward the great gate. In it he found the old guest house, a large building of grey weathered stone with two wings running back from the street, and between them a narrow green sward, behind which was the many-windowed house, fronted along its whole width by a pillared porch and a flight of steps down upon the grass. Boys were playing among the pillars, the only children that Pippin had seen in Minas Tirith, and he stopped to look at them. Presently one of them caught sight of him, and with a shout he sprang across the grass and came into the street, followed by several others. There he stood in front of Pippin, looking him up and down. "Greetings," said the lad. "Where are you from? You're a stranger in the city." I was, said Pippin, but they say I have become a man of Gondor. Oh, come, said the lad. Then we're all men here. But how old are you, and what is your name? I am 10 years already, and shall soon be 5 feet. I am taller than you, but then my father is a guard, one of the tallest. What is your father? Which question shall I answer first? Said Pippin. My father farms the lands round Whitwheel near Tuckborough in the Shire. I am nearly 29, so I pass you there, though I am but 4 feet, and not likely to grow any more, save sideways. 29, said the lad, and whistled. Why, you are quite old as my uncle Earless. Still, he added hopefully, I wager I could stand you on your head or lay you on your back. Maybe you could if I let you, said Pippin with a laugh, and maybe I could do the same to you. We know some wrestling tricks in my little country, where, let me tell you, I am considered uncommonly large and strong, and I have never allowed anyone to stand me on my head, so if it came to a trial and nothing else would serve, I might have to kill you. For when you are older, you will learn that folk are not always what they seem. And there you may not have taken me for a soft stranger-led and easy prey. Let me warn you, I am not. I am a halfling, hard, bold, and wicked. Pippin pulled such a grim face that the boy stepped back a pace, but at once returned with a clenched fist and the light of battle in his eye. No, said Pippin and laughed. Don't believe what strangers say of themselves either. I am not a fighter. But it would be politer in any case for the challenger to say who he is. The boy drew himself up proudly. I am Burgle, son of Beregond of the Gods, he said. So I thought, said Pippin, for you look like your father. I know him, and he sent me to find you. Then why didn't you say so at once, said Burgle, and suddenly a look of dismay came over his face. Do not tell me he has changed his mind and will send me away with the maidens. But no, the last wains have gone. His message is less bad than that, if not good, said Pippin. He says that you would prefer to if you would prefer to standing me on my head, you might show me around the city for a while and cheer my loneliness. I could tell you some tales of far countries in return. Burgle clapped his hands and laughed with relief. All is well, he cried. Come then. We were soon going to the gate to look on. We will go now. What is happening there? The captain of the Outlands are expected in the South Road ere sundown. Come with us and you will see. Okay. All right, we just have 2.5 pages left here, so. Burgle proved a good comrade, the best company Pippin had had since he parted from Merry, and soon they were laughing and talking gaily as they went about the streets, heedless of the many glances that men gave them. Before long they found themselves in a throng going towards the great gate. There Pippin went up much in the esteem of Burgle, for when he spoke his name and the password, the gods saluted him and let him pass through. And what was more, he allowed him to take his companion with him. That is good, said Burgle. We boys are no longer allowed to pass the gate without an elder. Now we shall see better. Beyond the gate there was a crowd of men along the verge of the road, and of the great paved space, into which all the ways to Minas Tirith ran. All eyes were turned southward, and soon a murmur rose. There is dust away there. They are coming. Pippin and Burgle edged their way forward to the front of the crowd and waited. Horns sounded at some distance, and the noise of cheering rolled toward them like a gathering wind. Then there was a loud trumpet blast, and all about them people were shouting, Forlong, Forlong! Pippin heard men calling. What do they say? He asked. Forlong has come, Burgle answered. Old Forlong the Fat, the Lord of Lusenach. That is where my grandsire lives. Hurrah! Here he is. Good old Forlong. Leading the line there came walking a big, thick-limbed horse, and on it sat a man of wide shoulders and huge girth, but old and grey-bearded, yet mail-clad and black-helmed, and bearing a long, heavy spear. Behind him marched proudly a dusty line of men, well-armed and bearing a great battle-axes. Grim-faced they were, and shorter and somewhat swarthier than any of the men Pippin had yet seen in Gondor. Forlong, men shouted. True heart, true friend, Forlong. But when the men of Lusenach had passed, they muttered, So few. 200, what are they? We hope for 10 times the number. That'll be the new tidings of the Black Fleet. They're sparing only a tithe of their strength. Still, every little is a gain. So notice that the term tithe is usually associated with a tax that you would pay to the church, but it literally does mean a tenth. It's supposed to be 10% of your income. So they're saying they're sending a tithe of their strength. We were hoping for 10 times the amount. And so the companies came and were hailed and cheered and passed through the gate, men of the Outlands, marching to defend the city of Gondor in a dark hour. But always too few, always less than hope looked for or need asked. The men of Ringlow Vale, behind the son of their lord, Devorin, strided on foot, 300s. From the uplands of Morthon, the great Blackroot Vale, tall Dwynhir with his sons, Dwylin and Durufin, and 500 bowmen. From the Anfalos, the Langstrand far away, a long line of men of many sorts, hunters and herdsmen of men, little villages, scantily equipped, save for the household Goraskil their lord. From Lamadon, a few grim hillmen without a captain, fisherfolk of the Ether, some 100 or more spared from the ships. Herluin the fair of the green hills from Penath Gellan with 300 of gallant green-clad men. And last and proudest Imrahil, prince of Dol Amroth, kinsman of the Lord, with gilded banners bearing the token of the ship and the silver swan, and a company of knights in full harness riding grey horses, and behind them 700 of men at arms, tall as lords, grey-eyed, dark-haired, singing as they came. And that was all. Less than 3,000 full told. No more would come. Their cries and the tramp of their feet passed to the city and died away. Their onlookers stood silent for a while. Dust hung in the air, for the wind had died and the evening was heavy. Already the closing hour was drawing nigh, and the red sun had gone behind Mindoluin. Shadow came down on the city. Decimated a tithe. Decimated is reduced by a tenth. You're right. I like when people use the word decimated in the proper context, even though it's not used that much anymore. Really interesting here. Of course, we hear about all these lords. Imrahil is really the only important one here. But it mentions that he is kinsman of the Lord, meaning that he is somewhat, in some way, related to Denethor. It's actually through marriage. So he's sort of his brother-in-law. Imrahil's sister was Denethor's late wife. So there you have it. And by the way, Imrahil's daughter, who is not in this story, but she is already born, she does exist at this point, she is going to marry King Eomer of Rohan. So Imrahil has a lot of connections to a lot of people, you know, especially that he has a little bit of that elvish ancestry in his past. You know, he's got a little bit of the Sylvan elf bloodline there. Pippin looked up, and it seemed to him that the sky had grown ashen grey, as if a vast dust and smoke hung about them, and light came dully through it. But in the west the dying sun had set all the fume on fire, and now Mindoluin stood black against a burning smoulder flecked with embers. "So ends a fair day in wrath," he said, forgetful of the lad at his side. "So it will if I have not returned before sundown bell," said Burgle. "Come, there goes the trumpet for the closing of the gate." Hand in hand they went back into the city, the last to pass the gate before it was shut, and as they reached the lamplight street all of the bells in the towers tolled solemnly. Lights sprang in many windows, and from the houses and wards of the men-at-arms along the walls there came the sound of song. "Farewell for this time," said Burgle. "Take my greetings to my father, and thank him for the company that he sent. Come soon again, I beg. Almost I wish now that there was no war, for we might have had some merry times. We might have journeyed to Lossarnoch, to my grandsire's house. It is good to be there in the spring. The woods and fields are full of flowers. But maybe we'll go thither again together yet. They will never overcome our lord, and my father is very valiant. Farewell and return." They parted, and Pippin hurried back toward the citadel. It seemed a long way, and he grew hot and very hungry, and night closed down swift and dark. Not a star pricked the sky. He was late for the day meal in the mess, and Baragon greeted him gladly, and sat him at his side to hear news of his son. At the meal Pippin stayed a while, and then took his leave, for a strange gloom was on him, and now he desired very much to see Gandalf again. "Can you find your way?" said Baragon, at the door to the small hall on the north side of the citadel where they had sat. "It is a black night, and all the blacker since orders came that lights are to be dimmed within the city, and none are to shine out from the walls. And I can give you news of another order. You will be summoned to the Lord Denethor early tomorrow. I fear that you will not be for the third company. Still we may hope to meet again. Farewell, and sleep in peace." The lodging was dark, save for the little lantern set on the table. Gandalf was not there. Gloom settled still more heavily on Pippin. He climbed on the bench and tried to peer out of a window, but it was like looking into a pool of ink. He got down and closed the shutter and went to bed. For a while he lay and listened for sounds of Gandalf's return, and then he fell into an uneasy sleep. In the night he was wakened by a light, and he saw that Gandalf had come and was pacing to and fro in the room beyond the curtain of the alcove. There were candles on the table and rolls of parchment. He heard the wizard sigh and mutter, "When will Faramir return?" "Hullo," said Pippin, poking his head round the curtain. "I thought you had forgotten all about me. I'm glad to see you back. It has been a long day." "But the night will be too short," said Gandalf. "I have come back here, for I must have a little peace alone. You should sleep in a bed while you still may. At the sunrise I shall take you to the Lord Denethor again. No, when the summons come, not at sunrise. The darkness has begun. There will be no dawn." And that's where that stops. Okay, so that's the first chapter of Book 5 of The Lord of the Rings, the first bit of the Return of the King. Now notice that he says there will be no dawn. So now, timeline-wise, this is right when Frodo and Sam and Gollum are approaching Cirith Ungol, because that's when they noticed that it was dark during the daytime. They're actually climbing the Great Stair and approaching Cirith Ungol at this time. So, like I said, while Book 4 was meant to sort of be this is what's happening during Book 3, but to different characters, it overlaps a bit with Book 5. And now the next chapter, which we'll get to the next time that we're streaming The Return of the King, is the passing of the Grey Company. So that means that the narrative is going to shift away from Pippin, and we're going to be joining Aragorn. And that's sort of the way that it's going to be for a while, where each chapter follows a different character. And then chapter 3, the muster of Rohan, that's where we'll go to Merry. And then chapter 4, the siege of Gondor, we're going to go to Pippin. So it's going to sort of go to the, to different characters for each chapter until the Field of Cormallen, when it's just going to follow Frodo till the end. But went a little later than I expected. But thank you for everybody that came by and watched the stream today. Thank you for everybody that subscribed on Twitch, and to the people that followed me and everything. And we have a new subscriber here on YouTube as well. I thank everybody that came by. It was a lot of fun. We have a lot of people in here. We have over 30 people in here. Somebody mentioned earlier 28 people watching. Of course, that wasn't counting people that are watching on Twitch. We have a lot of people in here. But hey, really fun, really cool. Let me, schedule-wise, let me let you guys know what's going to happen. So if you're watching me on Twitch, you guys know that I'm live every day. And that tomorrow I'll be playing Dragon Quest II, HD 2D Remake. Saturday it will be Xenoblade 3. Sunday will be Mega Man X Command Mission. You guys know the schedule. For those of you that are watching me on YouTube, the next stream will be next week, the 16th. And we're going to play more of that Two Towers video game for Game Boy, which is so much more fun than the PlayStation version. The PlayStation version was fine, right? But the Game Boy version is a lot more fun for me, especially since there's a lot more to talk about, Tolkien related. And of course, in 2 weeks, on the 23rd, it may be another Return of the King reading. I'll let you guys know. That's probably what we're going to be doing. There's a lot to get through there. And and thank you, Joe. So for those of you watching on YouTube, the live is going to end. For those of you who may be watching on Twitch, we're going to raid somebody. So let's see who we're going to raid. Let me bring up who's on. Let's see. Hana's playing Dragon Quest IV. That's always good. But who else is on? A lot of people to choose from. I think it's gonna be Hana. Hana's, like I said, she's playing Dragon Quest IV. She's played like the original version, I think. And she basically just started her stream. So let's rate her.
I thought it would be really funny to start pronouncing vibrant as vibrant. I don't know. We thought it was like the funniest thing.
Let's see. Nocturnal.
So we did that when I was like 10.
Hana. That's who we're gonna raid.
Saying it like that. And then it got to a point where anytime I'd see the word vibrant, like when I'm reading it in my head, I'll like feel inclined to just say it as vibrant, like in my head when I'm reading. And there's just like various other words. So
I'm putting a
annoying.
commentary on what she's talking
This
about.
is one
All
of
right.
those things.
Okay, guys, so for those of you on Twitch, there is your raid call. Copy that, paste it as we head into Hana's stream. For those of you on YouTube, like I said, the live is going to end. Thank you so much. Enjoy the videos. I'll see you guys next week. For those of you on Twitch, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Here we go.